All right. It says we're live. I'm just checking yours really quick because there's the couple second delay. There we go. Yep, we're live on yours and mine. Okay.
Awesome.
How's it going?
Not bad, not bad. It's been
Awesome.
a little busy day, but
Gotcha.
nice to be on here with you. I know we kind of
Yeah.
tried to see if we could get a little few ideas across previously, but didn't end up kind of
Mhm.
getting to talk about some of the stuff about the what was that? It was the was it a
Oh,
hypothetical or the I
yeah.
guess the lion
Moist
hypothetical?
Vegan was asking you about the lion thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think do you think that would be a good place to start off today?
Yeah. Let's go for it. Yeah. So the question was, is it good to kill predators to save their prey? And the person that was asking you was comparing it to the idea of if somebody was going to kill a person, and would you kill the person to protect this person? And then there's a whole self defense element. So I guess just go ahead and let me know what your thoughts are on why you do or don't think predator culling is all right.
In my estimation, it's kind of like a trolley problem thing where I think like what I tend to think about is what I have as an effect on it, like the effect that I have on others,
Mm-hmm.
what part I would have in some harm happening. And
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want to be the cause of harm in an instance where I would be able to not cause that harm. It's kind of like I don't know if you're familiar with like the what conversation. I think that was when I was talking with Akash about um, the possibility of saving drowning babies from a lake, like from drowning in a
Yeah.
lake. If you had the opportunity to just pull them out easily, and let's say you just had an hour, like how could you ever kind of get yourself to walk away from that lake if there were just babies, just where only their mouths were kind of like in the water, and you had
Yeah.
to kind of save them from drowning, like in those instances, I mean, you have to basically at some point, it's kind of like the donating to charity at any given time kind of thing. I mean, there's a certain amount of harm that I think is inherent to the world, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it even is implicated in my being vegan. I mean,
Yeah.
my being vegan has to do with my um, seeing it as totally unnecessary to participate in animal exploitation and cruelty in my day to day life. And it's kind of like one of those things where um, it's like it's such an easy thing for me to do. It's such a minimal uh, derailment for my day to day life, and it can do such a great deal of good. So
Yeah.
that kind of goes along with my moral system. But if it's like, oh, in order to make the whole animal kingdom non-violent, we're gonna have to go in these helicopters and start shooting tranquilizer darts or something like
Yeah.
that into lions. Like it's not the business I want
D-
to be involved in.
Does it kind of break down to, you think, almost completely that action matters, but inaction is optional? So like anything that you would do that would cause the harm, not going to do it. But if it comes down to the idea of added action, like saving something, that's up to the individual. It's not vegan to not save a drowning dog, but it would be extra awesome if you did.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like
Gotcha.
I think when you talk about moral virtue and say that some things are like, if you say that a passive action or a course of action is morally neutral, and then you go on to say, but I think XYZ would be morally virtuous, people tend to get really up in arms and they're like, so you wouldn't say that it's a moral obligation to save like a drowning whatever baby or something like that? And I'm like, it's morally virtuous. Like it doesn't mean that
Hmm.
it's a huge big deal and you need to get some like peace prize for it and get awarded for it and pat yourself on the back and gloat about it for the rest of your life, but it is a morally virtuous thing to do. It's like that
Hmm.
man saved a baby, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
if it wasn't a moral virtue, then people wouldn't even mention it, you know what I mean? It would just be like
Hmm.
they just did their obligation, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
and I think it's a humble thing to do, to pass off a virtue as like, oh, as an obligation, and be like, oh, I was just doing my obligation, but it is still a virtue to go out of your way
Hmm.
to help someone.
Yeah, the obligation would only be involved if you're legally responsible, so like a parent or a guardian or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
You can't just leave a 6 month old to starve to death, even though you're not doing an action. The wrong action is just neglect. It's not actual action, but that's more of societal rules and whatnot. Okay, well, I want to push you. I want to push you on it a little bit though. So there's certain actions you wouldn't do, like you wouldn't kill the lion to save the zebra, but if it was a person that one person was going to kill another person, you would save them if you knew you could do it fine. You weren't going to be harmed. The innocent person that was the victim wasn't going to be harmed, but the person that you knew was going to kill the innocent person for absolutely no reason. Would you kill that person to save the innocent one?
I mean, so we're talking about we're just in a vacuum, right? There's no legal stuff that could happen as a result of it, right? It's just like completely.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard that mentioned. I don't know if it's worth getting too far into. I don't think there are any repercussions that could happen for protecting somebody and killing somebody in the process. I heard some talk about stand your ground, which is the difference between somebody basically not having to show any reason for why they do what they do. But if there's clear reasons for self-defense. Anyways, we don't need to get into that part. Yes, it's in a vacuum. You won't get in trouble
Or
whatsoever.
even if, I mean, even if it wasn't in a vacuum, like if I was in a situation where somebody, for example, like broke into my home and it was a matter of like protecting myself and my partner, like, and I had the means to use lethal force, and they were
Let's just say
clearly
it was a
illegal.
random stranger, though. Like,
Yeah.
so you
Oh.
were just at the park and there was a person, and somehow you magically had this information that person A is just an innocent person hanging out. Person B is maybe a psychopath of sorts that gets joy from killing others. Person B is going to kill person A. And what your action only affects of if you're going to save person A. If you let person B kill person A, they're probably going to get caught, go to jail, all that stuff. But the question is, do you think it's morally to you best to save the person A's life?
The reason that I have difficulty with that, I think it is best to save their life, and I think
Mm-hmm.
I would try to find non-lethal ways to do so. Of course, like if I think that killing is wrong, then I'm going to try to find non-lethal ways to rescue the person who's being killed in this hypothetical. But I also think that this is like it kind of the implications of saying yes to this pertain to my beliefs on the death penalty,
Mm-hmm.
and I think if I'm not fine with somebody receiving the death penalty for killing a person, a human, then I guess it's really, really difficult for me to say that I think it would be just in order to prevent that crime, to dole out that kind of punishment in advance almost.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah, I think you just have to figure out, and I think that's why it's good to have hypotheticals and conversations, but you'd have to figure out why you're against the death penalty. It's kind of interesting. I've always been against death penalty as long as I've been interested in politics, but I never really put much thought into where the barriers would be. And I recognize while watching a Western film, back in the Western days, at least according to the films that I watched, whenever somebody like killed some people and they got put in jail, like their group would come and tie ropes to a wall of the jail and rip the wall down, and then the guy would escape. And then I realized, like, I'm against the death penalty in the sense that I think it's best for a society to protect humans, like human life completely. And so if somebody does something wrong and they have to go to jail for life, that's to keep them from harming again. But if you can't keep them contained and they are going to kill other humans, so in that kind of case where somebody can get broken out of jail, then I would say if they are likely to commit a murder again, their life should be taken for that reason. It's almost like a self-defense in advance.
mm.
But if we are capable of containing them and removing them from society, then that's where I would stand on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if are you familiar with the Harry Potter movies?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, so like I would want Voldemort to like not exist. I wouldn't want
Hmm.
I wouldn't want to keep him in some Horcrux where he could get out eventually. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Um, but what I would want, I mean, I'm not, I just think it's an overreach of state authority um, to legitimize, like, to legitimize taking of a life. Like,
Yeah.
I think, even state power as it is, I mean, it's basically the authorized or quote unquote legitimate use of force. That's really
Hmm.
all that all that government power really boils down to.
Hmm.
And and everything that the state essentially does is done at with the implicit understanding that if you are going to go against that, you're going against that at the threat of force being like legitimately wielded against you.
Hmm.
Um, whether that force is being forcibly incarcerated or a number of things that they could force you to pay a fine, and so on and so forth. I mean, I just think there should be a limit to that, I think. But
Gotcha. Yeah.
because
Um,
I don't think it should be able to extend to taking away, like, a life, because you weren't given your life by the state, and even if you were, I don't think that that would be okay.
yeah. 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 No, it's definitely complicated. But yeah, I want to bring it back to the predator culling thing. So, okay, so an innocent person's going to be killed. You would kill the person killing them to save their lives. You'd prefer to stop them without killing them. And then, how would you describe your reason for why you wouldn't do so with the lion and the zebra? If you're out in nature, you're in a tree, you have a gun, there's just one case, you see a lion coming up, a zebra, and what do you do?
I mean, like, I don't know. I don't think that I would kill someone. Like, I don't think that I would kill somebody in that situation.
Oh wait, a person going to kill a person?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I discriminate between species in that sense. Like, I think that this is a simple trolley problem. Like, if there was a train track and it was going to run over 5 people, and you could make it run over one person, would you make it run over one person?
If
Right.
it's simple in the other direction. But yeah, no, I love the trolley problem, and I want to get to that in a sec. But let's go back to look at the people again. So again, let's make them not connected to you because that changes everything. It's random strangers. In this hypothetical, if you do not kill the one that's going to kill the innocent person, then the innocent person will die. You don't think it's justifiable to kill a person that's going to kill somebody else when you know for sure that they're doing it just for fun?
Um, you know, uh, I'm I struggle with it because again, it's to me, it's like the state doling out the death penalty kind of a thing.
Well,
Maybe to think,
let's just go just off yourself. Like, let's not even think of the state, any of that. Yeah, I mean, you can if you want. Sorry, I'm not trying
well,
to
no,
take your.
well, let me ask you this: do you think it would be analogous if, let's say, there was a train track and the
Uh-huh.
train is heading down, um, let's say it's just heading down, like, one way, and it's going to kind of fork off into
Yeah.
two things, and you don't know which way it's going by default, but
Okay.
you like there's a center position of a switch, and you don't know what the default is, if that's up or
Yeah.
down, but you see clearly that you can move it up or down,
Mm-hmm.
and on
It'll
one
go five
side
or one.
there's, sorry,
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say five on one side and one on the other.
no,
Okay.
Voldemort on one side and Harry Potter on the other. I
Okay.
would make it go over Voldemort.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. 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 If you know the details. Okay. Details. Blah blah blah. Blah, blah. Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
if I know, or if I knew that there was somebody who presumably is
Wait.
innocent,
Wait. Wouldn't that mean that you would kill the person that's gonna kill the innocent person? If one of them's gonna die, and you have to do an action that leads to it.
Yeah, I guess I would. I guess I would in that case. I mean, especially given the fact that there wouldn't even be a train moving, theoretically in the first place, were it not for that. It's almost like, Voldemort in this case, or the bad guy is kind of pulling the train track in a way, because they're
Yeah.
setting forth in motion that whole like death
Yeah.
scenario in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but here's the thing. Okay, so you're not speciesist, so don't worry, because this is the thing that I wanted to talk to you about when I heard that question come up. Um, if you kill a person to save an innocent person, like that just seems clearly obvious to me, because there's no reason for them to do it. If the person killing the person that I initially called innocent was doing it because they were saving somebody else, then you'd be doing a wrong action. So it depends on the reasoning. A lion, in my mind, if a lion was killing a zebra to eat it, I wouldn't care because it's doing what it needs to do to survive. But if a lion was just out killing zebras for fun and not eating them, I would totally kill that lion. Luckily, pretty much all animals, from my understanding, just do what they naturally do to survive, and they don't like torture things just for fun. Although I think I've heard there are some. But if I was a carnivore, I would eat animals. I'm not gonna do the vegan gains thing and just let myself die. And so I wouldn't expect a lion to do that. And so same thing with another human. If there was a human that was a cannibal and that was the only way to survive, they couldn't eat other meat, they couldn't eat anything else, or whatever. And I saw out in nature, outside of a society, a human was going to eat another human, and I knew that was the reason. I would put myself in both of their shoes and go, if I was the cannibal, I'd eat a human. And if I was the innocent human about to be eaten, I'd want to survive. And I wouldn't intervene. I would stay out of it. Similar to, I would stay out of the trolley car. I'm not gonna pick who lives or who dies. I stay out of it, but I don't stay out of it when there's no good reason and it's an immoral act with no good reason.
Yeah, I mean, I still think that when I praise my moral decision making across species, I still think that I err on the side of neutrality.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really not sure. Like, I know that that seems like an obvious thing. Like, yeah, kill the um, to kill the person who is the perpetrator, who's killing an innocent individual. But I mean, if you look at the implications of that across species,
Mm-hmm.
across species who aren't morally protected, it gets really, really troublesome because um, you end up having to slide off principle basically and accept to a great degree speciesistic um, implications within yourself, which I think is really, really troublesome. It's essentially like um, damning you to um, retire into a speciesistic mindset, to accept that about yourself. Because, we know that there are people who are hurting non-human animals just for fun. And it's troubling to me if the only thing that's keeping um, somebody from going on a murderous rampage against non-vegans is the fact that it's not legal for them to do so. That's deeply
Mm-hmm.
troubling to me.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's where that hypothetical would kind of conclude.
Mm-hmm. Well, that actually reminds me. One of the until we decided to talk about this predator culling thing, I thought the first good thing to talk about would be the. I heard you talking to somebody, and you were wondering why I cared if something was legal or not. I think maybe it was when you were reacting to the vegan gains debate, when I would talk about the difference between it being legal or not legal to kill animals. So let me try to give you my reasoning for that. So it's kind of poor wording on my part. I, my thought process goes to it being legal or not, but really it comes down to, am I part of the action, which is kind of like what you were talking about earlier. So I think I take it maybe even to a further extreme than you, but I'm not sure. You can let me know. With the trolley car, if it's going towards the 5 and I could make it go to the 1, I don't make it go to the 1. But if it was the same thing in trolley car going towards a billion people, I wouldn't make it go to the 1. I would just let nature take its course. So would you do the same with a billion, or would that change it up?
I mean, again, it's like this is one of those things where the hypothetical, in my mind, hypotheticals are only as good as they're able to apply to reality.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if there was, let's say there was a um, famous influencer who had, like, a following on YouTube of billions of people, and their claim to fame was like once a year they just massacre like a zillion leeches or something. Like, let's say they massacre a billion leeches, and they
Mm-hmm.
figured out how many ounces like one leech weighs, and they have this huge silo, and they've calculated like there are 1 billion leeches in this,
Mm-hmm.
and they just set the silo, like, they douse it with gasoline and just set it on fire. So all these leeches, who are sentient beings, are just being burned alive. I still wouldn't take it upon myself to go and try to kill that person, because I don't believe in
Yeah.
exacting violence against others for political means, basically. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or
Um,
ends, rather.
yeah, but if there was a train going towards that silo that was going to take them all out, and you could press a button that would make it go and just take one out, do you do you
One
pull that
leech
lever?
or the
Sure.
influencer.
Oh, no. It would just be the equalized situation. So it could be a billion cows and one cow, a billion humans and one human. It would just be equal. So whatever. Let's go away from leeches because I don't know much about them. But yeah, let's start with
Let's
humans.
say grasshoppers, voles.
Yeah. What's your answer for humans though, real quick? Um,
You know, Again, it's hard. Like, I would want to save lives. Like, I would want to save, if they already, presuming, like, okay, so if it was a scenario of like, um let's say beings who don't yet exist, and I'm just kind of thinking out loud, honestly, like, these aren't questions that I really bother myself with,
mhm.
to be perfectly honest. But um if it were like beings who don't yet exist, and I had the choice of like making one being not exist versus making 1,000 or 100,000 or whatever beings not exist, I'd
Mhm.
probably choose to make the 100,000 beings not exist.
Mm.
Um, but because I know that once those beings exist, they're probably going to cause a great deal of harm.
Gotcha.
And I think, like, I'm not anti-natalist, but I think that um, picking the 100,000 beings coming into existence would be so overwhelmingly pro-natalist that,
Mhm.
it would kind of be, it would be like, well, they don't already exist. They're not. There's not. Their well-being isn't a factor. There's no well-being.
Mm.
Um, but if
Okay.
the scenario is like 100,000 beings who already exist,
Mhm.
um, I wouldn't consider, like, we could totally erase like implications of their suffering, all that stuff. Like,
Mhm. Oh
um,
yeah, this is just death. Yeah.
yeah, and I wouldn't want their lives to be robbed from them. Basically, I
Mhm.
wouldn't, I would consider it a greater tragedy for a larger number of beings to have their lives ended,
Mhm.
um, than a smaller number of beings having their
But
lives
would you sacrifice a smaller number if that smaller number is one and it's nobody you've ever met?
This is, I think, the greatest. What this question kind of exposes is the greatest difficulty with my moral framework,
Mhm.
because I don't know where that threshold is. Even
Yeah.
even if it wasn't 100,001, even if it was 5 and 1, I still
Mhm.
struggle with that. And
Yeah.
and
Fair,
that's
fair
that's
enough.
where I have my greatest inconsistency, and I really don't have an answer
Okay, it's fine.
for
I
that.
was mostly just curious, but more so, I'm using it to explain my position on why the legality matters with animals, and it sort of actually doesn't. But so yeah, so I would not kill one to save a billion people, but same thing with an animal. Like I respect animal lives. I would like if there was 5 cows and one cow, and the train was going towards the five. I wouldn't switch it to the one. I would not personally affect an animal. So when I talk about the legality mattering, it's because if there was a train that was going to kill, there was 5 cows and one cow, and somehow the train was set up in a way where it was going to kill all of them, and somebody asked me, if you want them not to all die, you can pick the one or the five. I'd gladly pick the one if I'm choosing between them. Same with people. If I had to pick between the two, but not if there's an action already in place. So that's the main problem with the trolley car, is that it's already in place. So if there's a plane crashing, and I could, like, if I could press a button to kill one innocent person here to save the 1,000 on the plane, I wouldn't do it. That's already in action. But if somebody just said like one random person's going to die or 100 random people are going to die, I'd be like, you're having me pick, and if I don't pick, they're all going to die. Okay, the one, kill the one.
What if
Yeah.
not all of them die from not picking? But what I'm wondering is, that example I gave where, for example, let's say it's in a middle position and you don't know which one the default is. It could be one or the other. Does that matter in terms of your rationale? Like, does it matter whether you see it pointed in one direction or the other, or whether it's just
Well, if I
like
had
in
to
the middle?
pick, I'd have to know what the outcomes are. If I don't get a pick, then do I have any effect on it at all?
I guess here's what I'm wondering. So there's two scenarios. I'm just trying to see if you'd have an easier time deciding in one scenario or the other. If there's one scenario where the switch is obscured, basically, like the middle position is obscured. So it can either be, it can kind of like, it's more confusing if I say that it's pointed in one direction or you don't know like what the default is, blah, blah, blah. But let's just say that, let's say that there's kind of like a needle can be pointed in either direction, and there's a middle kind of like buffer zone. So it can be in one direction, but this much is obscured, so it can just be a little bit on one way. So it's going one way or another in all possible scenarios. But some scenarios it's obvious to you which way it's going. You can mess with all the switches if you want, but I'm saying, does it matter to you whether or not you can see? Like, would you be like trying to look under and trying to see where the needle was in knowing whether or not you should interfere?
Well, interfering in something taking place, I wouldn't interfere whatsoever. But if we're talking about a case where I'm told I get to pick one, but I don't get to see, yeah.
No.
Yeah,
If you pick, you know what you're doing. Like,
yeah.
but I'm saying that because we're talking about something.
If we're talking about interfering, I would not interfere
in any scenario ever.
I wouldn't interfere in a case where I had to kill an innocent to save a higher number
Of innocence.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean,
to save them from death, I would kill all the people that are trying to kill people to save other people. But just to save from, like, say, an accident, the higher number doesn't affect me. It only starts to affect me if, like, my loved ones are involved, or if we're down to the point where only one human's going to exist. Just because we're social creatures, so we probably need another human. But yeah, that number doesn't affect me. I think I'm so rights based, and what do the people call me? A deontologist that doesn't have a threshold. It doesn't affect me in any way. But if I could try to convince people to not do wrong things when it comes to convincing them, then numbers are everything. I mean, they must be, because there would be a number of harm that could happen. A potential number of harm. Like, for example, every year, what is it, like in the trillions of animals are harmed? So my hope would be the smallest number possible. But that's because I think none of them should be harmed. So therefore, any number between 1 and the number that it's happening to would be my goal. So when I talk about it mattering that it's legal or not, is if somebody's going to kill another person, the legality is everything. It's I would just hope that the cops will catch them. But if somebody is going to do something wrong that is legal, like eating animals, then the legality affects it, because my hope would be, and it looks like what's that? It looks like utilitarianism, but it's not in any way. It's that I want the rights for all of them. So if somebody, it's basically up to me and you and the rest of us to convince these people to do as much good as they possibly can, to not have these rights violations affected, because the law doesn't care, because it's not illegal. And so that's why the numbers matter. So if there's 100 cows being butchered to make steaks, and I can convince somebody to cut down from 5 steaks a week to 3 steaks a week, and enough people did that it affected the farm, the math would add up to there'd only be 60 cows instead of 100 cows bred the next year. And so to each individual, anyway, so now I'm just rambling, but that's when I say the legal thing, that's kind of what I'm referring to, is if somebody else is choosing, if stranger A over here is choosing, would you rather me kill this one person or this 100 people? Or if they're saying, would you rather me eat this 1 steak or these 10 steaks? I'd say eat the 1 steak, because I want whatever's going to cause the least amount of rights violations.
I don't disagree with the notion of, like, if somebody's saying that they're going to cause this much amount of harm versus this much amount of harm, and they ask you, like, should I do more harm or less harm? Of course, I would say do less harm. I think unfortunately, in when it comes to advocacy, it's not as simple as that, and we always want to give people the benefit of the doubt in terms of the degree of change that they're possible of, instantiating their lives. I know, like me, I was almost like a troll. I drove by a circus protest once, and I yelled at them that I loved the circus, and now I look at it and I'm like, these animals are in chains, they're enslaved. They're there against their will, being forced to perform, and they're subjects of cruelty. You know what I mean? Like, but it was literally me who drove by and said, like, I love the circus. Like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, do you care if we take a couple questions? I see one
No,
for
no,
me
go
and
for
one
it.
for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so Daniel wants to know, in a hypothetical, if somebody told me that I have to kill somebody or else I'm going to be killed, would I do it? This has no connection to veganism, but I don't like to stray away from a hypothetical. I think it's immoral to do so, but realistically, I would probably do it. It might depend on some details, but it's really hard for somebody to actually sacrifice their life, so I don't know if I would. And then the question for you is, what do you think of the word carnist?
I think it's kind of funny. I think it's it's a word that has a meaning. Like, it has there's no word that really means what that means. Because I think if somebody is non-vegan, they may not even know what veganism is, and they can still be non-vegan. But I think if someone is a carnist, not necessarily implying that they would know what veganism means, but it's kind of like somebody who subscribes to the ideology of using animals, commodifying them, benefiting from them, basically exploiting animal life. I'm not sure if you had heard the part in the conversation. I think that was with Akash maybe, but I had said that I had actually met Melanie Joy. I think this was back in like 2014 or so, almost 10 years ago, if not longer. But she had actually said that she doesn't really like that term. And not to put words in her mouth or assume what she was saying, but I would think that that's because she's for kind of like building bridges, and kind of like empathizing with the psychology of non-vegans, and not using kind of othering language, would be my guess. But I think, like, as far as like something that builds cohesion between vegans, I think it's kind of a funny term. And I mean, I have a lot of issues with Melanie Joy's views that I've heard espoused in recent times. She did a discussion with Humane Hancock, where if I recall correctly, they were kind of very soft, I guess, in terms of like the vegan imperative, and as far as like abolitionism goes.
Gotcha.
My question for you, I guess, would be like, could I ask you a totally random question?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, this was going to be kind of like maybe a segue to the abolition versus welfare thing, but I thought of a random question. I think it'd be a good time to ask you. So, do you know if dust mites are sentient?
Oh, I don't.
Okay, I think they are sentient, but I'm just not sure. If you can search for it, that would be good to know. But so I can't imagine that they're not. I mean, they're not bacteria. I know they are animals. And from what I've read, like different like parasitic worms, like, pinworms and roundworms and hookworms, other kinds of worms that can like infest people's intestines, etc. I believe they are sentient. I don't see any reason to believe that a dust mite wouldn't be sentient. But I was just thinking about like, you know how dust mites are kind of known to populate in the zillions, billions, millions, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
in bed sheets. And
Mm.
presumably, there's like, would you agree that even if you didn't wash your bed sheets for even like a whole year, you probably wouldn't die as a result of that?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
correct.
you might have like worse allergies, you might have more frequent sinus infections, you might even get a chronic sinus infection for the whole year. You might
Mm-hmm.
develop some kind of lung disease or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
possibly, right? But these are like remote possibilities. You'd probably be fine. Like they might smell a little bit at the end of the year, after a whole year of not washing them. But I guess like if we knew that washing our bed sheets causes dust mites to die, and if it doesn't make an appreciable difference to our health or well-being, whether we wash them, let's say not a whole year or less than that, but like let's say like washing our bed sheets every week versus washing them every 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you think that if we knew that dust mites were sentient, would we have an obligation to not wash them often? Or would you say that maybe if we left the bed sheets, we'd actually let them kind of like propagate more? There'd be a greater number that we'd kill each time? Or I guess, how would you kind of solve the bed sheet conundrum?
Yeah. So, yeah, yeah, that's kind of interesting. It would depend on the health aspect because, like, for me, I don't just view it on would I live or not. I view it on like, is my health affected, like, in any significant way. Um,
But just to pause you there, if I could.
mhm.
So, if your health, let's say you would cough one more time over the whole course of the year, and you wouldn't
Okay.
have any other health effects, but you would end up massacring like 300 billion bed bugs just to save yourself from like one temporary moment of discomfort where you would cough.
Yeah, I mean, if we knew in a vacuum it was just a cough, then yeah, I like the idea that something so tiny that I can't see that is there should bother me because if we saw close up pictures of it, it looks gross or whatever. Like, it really doesn't matter. I mean, there's so many animals in the world where like other animals are on it, cleaning it and doing various different things. If it's just part of some yeah, if it's something that like likes to feed off of our dead skin cells, therefore it's the type of thing that would be around us. I have no reason to have it not around. As soon as it gets to a level of it's starting to affect me, then I would say that I wouldn't mind taking it out. And that's me answering with the hypothetical of it being sentient. But no, it says mites. Let's see, no mites are sentient.
Hmm. Interesting to know.
It was just a quick Google search. I don't know. I don't know how official this is, but
Yeah, I'd have to follow up on that. I'm just not sure. I know that there are also like these little like these little mites, like they're called like skin mites or something. They're supposedly like at the roots of our eyelashes and stuff like that. They supposedly
mm,
like go down and live in the oil glands and stuff. It's pretty
mm,
gross. Like if you look at pictures of these beings, like it's pretty
mm.
nasty.
Yeah,
Um,
it seems weird for sure. I mean, it really depends on how it's affecting somebody. If you can zoom in and see it and it looks gross, that almost means nothing to me. It depends on what it's doing to me. I yeah, I wouldn't sacrifice much of my health. Um,
This kind of reminds me of like I forget who you were talking to, but there was something that I heard about like if there were like rabbits eating carrots and there were in it like these innocent rabbits eating the carrots and they didn't know that they were doing anything wrong. Like I think this was a topic about like crop protection measures or something like that.
mm,
Um, it's I guess it's kind of still on the line hypothetical scenario where like you depend on these crops for your survival, and these rabbits who are eating these crops aren't trying to negatively impact your survival. For all they know, they're not trespassing at all. They're just sitting around eating carrots.
mhm.
And in that case, I mean, we can't ascribe any wrongdoing to them, and we don't really, we would still survive if we ate like, over the course of, I don't know, a month or something, instead of having eaten 400 calories worth of carrots. If we had a smaller amount of carrots that we could each consume and then share a little bit with those rabbits, that would be the ideal scenario.
Mhm.
The way that I see it, I would think that it would be an improved scenario in the like crop protection scenario, or even in terms of like pro/anti/neutral toward natalism kind of aspects, like if we could just share as humankind, and kind of like each, everyone could not be so greedy. I think that
Mm-hmm.
the world could, I mean, people talk about overpopulation all the time, but I
Mm-hmm.
truly believe that with the right technology in place, the world could support, um, you know, I don't want to throw out some random number and have somebody be like, are you sure about that? Because my calculations say this or that. But I mean, I don't think we're even close to overpopulated in the
Yeah,
planet.
gotcha. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, and the goal, no matter what, would just be to do the best we could do. So, so if you can achieve the best, then that's great. And if not, you just do. That's what I tell people whenever somebody brings up the idea of, well, I saw this study that shows that veganism isn't sustainable. Blah blah blah. I just say, okay, well, if we had 1 billion people, and once you got to 500 million being vegan, if anything past that is not sustainable, then that's how many vegans we should have. We, it wouldn't mean that we should just start making everything suffer for no reason just because something's not sustainable. We would do the absolute best we can until we can't do anything any further, and then we'd continue doing that absolute best.
Yeah. I mean, when I address somebody saying something like that, it's known as a nirvana fallacy, what they're doing, because they're comparing the best case possible scenario, like
Mm.
the nirvana, with not the band, but just like
Yeah.
heaven scenario,
Mm-hmm.
with what the vegan is proposing we do, which is an imperfect solution. Um, the way that I would respond, I wouldn't tell them flat out like that's a nirvana fallacy, because it's not really conducive to civil dialogue at that point if I'm just immediately moving it into debate territory. But I could say something like, what would be the benefit in not adopting this, or like, why would you compare what I'm why would you like, or like, is it fair to compare veganism to the best case scenario, for example?
Mm.
um, Instead of saying like, why would we just cause this harm for no reason or something like that? Because a lot of times people have their reasons, that's the kind of like, that's the kind of shell in the shotgun that they're kind of like, they've already just cocked the discussion to follow up with, kind of a thing. It's almost like
Mm-hmm.
inviting this whole long diatribe. But if you get them to earnestly ask themselves a question like, why should we hold veganism to such a standard that it has to be compared to with like the other thing, the alternative is perfection, which we're not going to reach with what they're saying. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
a lot better to, I think, rather than almost like looking at what somebody's doing and trying to call them out for it, remind them of the standard to which they're holding veganism. And I think that this oftentimes is something that, like, the people who talk about crop deaths, and people who talk about things that, like, oh, you're vegan, so you don't step over insects and stuff like that, or you don't ever walk outside, or do you worry about killing insects? Or, I've been asked these questions that are almost like purity tests.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I found is really helpful is just to tell these people, look, man, like, I just don't want animals to be farmed or exploited or used. I don't want their lives to be a form of currency that we're using for
Mm-hmm.
human purposes. And, your definition, like, if that's the vegan definition of veganism that you hold, and you're like some kind of demigod here on earth, like, more power to you. But like, I would say to those people, your definition of veganism is a lot more demanding on an individual and a lot harder to attain than what I would subscribe
Mm-hmm.
to. So I think it's important not to get caught up in the kind of weeds of perfection that I think a lot of non-vegans will foist upon us, to try
Mm-hmm.
to like cause us to second guess ourselves and underestimate the impact of what we're doing
Yeah.
or not doing.
Yeah. Yeah, because to various different degrees, we're just trying to do the best we can, and we just happen to all align with, for the most part, we happen to all align with not eating animal flesh and dairy and eggs, and then the rest is all kind of up for discussion.
Well, I
Um,
would say that, I mean, I guess this is kind of segueing into the veganism definition
mhm.
conversation I know we wanted to have. So maybe it'd be good to just segue there. But
Yeah.
I would say, like, as far as what the kind of like aim of veganism is. I'd see it as a very like I'd see it as very much as a means to an end rather than an end in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like, rather than saying like, okay, like everybody's vegan now, like, it's problem solved kind of thing. It's more like veganism is the means by which we obtain animal liberation, or this kind of the
Yeah.
state where we're not commodifying animals.
Mm-hmm.
And what kind of, you had a discussion, I forget the gentleman's name, but it
Yeah,
was about
Angelo.
Angelo. Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you. And he had, your conversation with him had gone toward this kind of idea that I think, I don't want to misquote it, but it was kind of like this idea of so what's ethical not necessarily being what's vegan, and what's vegan not necessarily being synonymous with what's ethical.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of truth to that, and that like there could be non-vegan behaviors or even events that contribute to the cause of animal liberation. I mean, there could be like a meteorite could strike down on the planet, and let's just say if it released some kind of gas that would end up eliminating all of the humans, and let's say all of the non-human animals could survive, that would lead the animals to animal liberation. But that would not be like a obviously a vegan thing. It would just be an
Mm-hmm.
act of God or act of nature, natural catastrophe. So I think like what veganism represents in the trajectory toward animal liberation is just the most practical, sensible way of achieving that like positive peace and that justice.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I agree. Well, here, let's look at the definition, and then we can just bounce some ideas back and forth. So,
Sure.
the definition that I wrote with a lot of information, it's hard to have a definition of a philosophy. And I think most people view veganism as a philosophy and actions, which you can't really have the two combined unless the philosophy itself demands action, which is fine. So I guess that's what it is. But so in my definition, I say veganism is a philosophy that seeks to extend moral consideration to non-human animals based on sentience. And then I go on to say, separate from the definition, that the goals of veganism, I say the ultimate goal of this philosophy, if achievable, would involve all humans not violating the negative rights of these animals by intentional use of force. And then one more part I wanted to read really quick. I'm going to skip around here. Veganism is a way of living that seeks to align actions with these moral considerations. These actions include actions for food, clothing, shelter, must always be on a spectrum, making it impossible to define actionable veganism. Yet invites ongoing debate about our actions and the actions of our fellow humans. If a vegan is one who subscribes to the philosophy of veganism, then one cannot be not a vegan based on their actions. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that it sounded good maybe up until just the end, I would say. I think like
Right.
a person's actions can certainly render them hypocrites, at least. If somebody says they're vegan and they seek to give moral consideration to non-human animals and reject the use of force against non-human animals, wherever practicable, or
Mm-hmm.
I guess like if it's intentional to do so, they would reject it if there's no good reason. I'm not sure exactly the wording you use, but
Mm-hmm.
I would see that as something that would fly in the face of somebody deciding to um, call themselves vegan, but then engage in actions that would directly involve using unnecessary or unjustifiable force against non-humans.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and then it would come down. Well, let's try two things. So one, if you're into some role playing, do you want to pretend to be a person that you would consider not vegan that maybe would be attempting to subscribe to my definition of veganism, and then you could throw an idea at me, and then I could try to counter it?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. So like, um, let's say that I'm someone who is, let's say I'm eating regeneratively farmed cows and who just eat grass all day. They're not grain finished. They're 100% through and through grass-fed cows. And let's say I'm going down to a stream and fishing for a few fishes. I live totally off the grid. I use only solar power. I don't use any kind of internal combustion engine stuff. Like I just ride a bike to get anywhere I need to go. Maybe I use some public transportation if I'm like in a bigger city or if I need to go to a city, and those trains, buses, etc., are just going to do their thing anyway, whether I'm on them or not. And basically, I still eat animals, but I'm not engaged in any kind of intentional harm against non-human animals as long as I can help it. And let's say that I have access to grocery stores and I could just buy produce instead, but I would consider that, let's say, more harmful because I might run over some rodents in my car accidentally, or I'm concerned with some kind of damage that might happen to the environment, or maybe even to my car's engine. And then, I wouldn't be able to extend the length of my car, the life of it, that I could enjoy it for, someone else could enjoy it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So but like I would say, I would consider myself vegan because I'm not exploiting any animals. I'm not being unnecessarily cruel to them. I just catch one fish and kill that fish quickly, and another fish would have eaten that fish anyway. And the cows, they have a great life, and their life is ended in 10 seconds, and they wouldn't have even existed if they weren't regeneratively farmed, kind of thing.
Okay, so I might ask a question like why do you think it's justified, or like why do you think it's justified to eat those animals?
For my survival, for my health.
Okay, so for your health. Okay, so then I might say something like, do you think it's acceptable to eat unhealthy animals, or are the details of the grass fed and all that, that's what you're convinced of is healthy?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that last part?
So for your survival, for your health means that you're consuming what you think you need to be healthy. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
to have a healthy, balanced diet.
Okay,
As
so
an
if I were
omnivore.
to say like, hey, it seems like there's a whole bunch of studies, and here's some that show that you can be healthy being vegan, or sorry, not being vegan, healthy eating just whole foods. What would your reaction be to that, or what could it be to that?
Uh, it could be, it could be that I think all these studies that show that are funded by special interests, and even if it declares that there's no conflict of interest in the study, that people got paid off under the table, and I don't trust the
Okay.
data. Or I could say, I could give you anecdotes. I could say that I had
Well,
a
that's
friend.
fine. That first part's fine. So, would you say that you're thoroughly convinced that that's the healthiest you can be is consuming these animal products? Okay. So what I would say to that is that, yeah, hopefully you can be convinced in the future to that it's healthier to go a different route, and hopefully you will go that route that would cause less harm to animals. Even though I want to see a vegan world, what I would I wouldn't feel comfortable convincing anybody to do something that they think they'd be declining their health. So in that case, I would consider if that person's being honest, which obviously anybody now, somebody that we might call a carnist could be like, I'm a vegan, and they're just saying they're vegan. And then we're like, yeah, are you really vegan? They're like, no, I'm not vegan. So anybody can say whatever they want. So if somebody wants to subscribe to something, because if they read a definition and they go like, this fits me, I would never want to harm an animal just for fun. I'm not going to eat chicken nuggets. That's bad for my health. So I'm not going to kill an animal just because it tastes good. I'm going to do it because of my survival. Kind of like I told you earlier, if humans were carnivores, I would eat meat. So this person's doing an action, like they, unlike me and you, are not convinced that they can be healthy eating plant foods. So to me, it would be actually kind of silly for them to eat plant foods. I just hope that our studies can keep getting better and better to convince them. So that's why I would consider the person you just described and became a vegan. And in my mind, a better future would involve calling that person a vegan. And clearly a better future than what we have now would be a world where all the vegans are still like the hardcore vegans are vegan, and then all the meat eaters were like the person you just described. Obviously, that'd be 1,000 times better than what we have now. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to set that aside for a second.
Wait, if I could just pause you
Yeah,
for a
yeah.
sec.
Okay.
When you say it would be 1,000 times better, is that um, by virtue of the difference in demand that would occur if people were only eating kind of like animal foods, quote unquote, that could reasonably be thought of as healthy?
Yeah, it would be a mixture of things. I guess I didn't get into it, but I'm guessing the character that you were playing would have to say that if they subscribe to my definition of veganism, they're not going to eat factory farmed animals. So what would be better than what we have now is if instead of 90 to 99% of meat coming from factory farms, we have it be the most humane that it can be, considering that it can't be humane to enslave and kill animals.
Yeah, I wonder if it might be worth also kind of like bifurcating this necessity topic into a couple different avenues and then maybe seeing if they merge. Namely, the avenue of accessibility as it kind of pertains to the health and survival thing. Because
Yeah.
accessibility, and I guess that would kind of be a convenience matter too. I mean,
Hmm.
what kind of comes to mind? Like I've told people in discussions before that if somebody was in Antarctica and the only things that they could eat there to survive would be like whale blubber, penguin meat, and some fishes, for example. Like, let's say there's
Hmm.
just no vegetation that's viable to grow there. If that person were eating animals, and let's say somebody dropped a book from a helicopter, and it was like, Earthling Ads, this is vegan propaganda, or something like that. If it was
Hmm.
some book and they read it, they were like, "Holy shit, I'm vegan. Like this describes how I view animals, how I've always
Yeah.
viewed animals. I just never stopped to think about this."
Hmm.
Then they could be vegan and continue to eat the penguin meat and the fishes and the whale blubber because they wouldn't have any other option
Hmm.
for their survival. And in that person's mind, I guess, like, would that person, I'm just kind of like thinking out loud here, bouncing this idea. I don't have an answer, like a preloaded kind of yes or no in my mind, but do you think that that would be properly analogous to the
Hmm.
person who believes, like, to the character that I played, for example, who has access to a grocery store, but
Yeah.
just like believes that based on what their doctors and teachers and parents have told them that they need to eat some amount of animals?
It's analogous in a sense. I mean, it's not in the sense that in one case it's somebody that is prioritizing their health. Like Vegan Gains said that if he was a carnivore and he was going to die if he didn't eat meat, he would just sacrifice himself. So for those types of vegans, which is fine, that is what it is. But for this, the person in that you created in the role play, that person is being a vegan as far as practicable while watching out for their own health. Whereas this other person, the health doesn't even play into it. It's just straight up practicable for survival. Now, both I think are perfectly acceptable in my moral view. Acceptable as in I accept it, not that I consider it moral. I would
Yeah,
do a lot of immoral things in cases where I needed to, but
yeah.
yeah, they're close enough. Yeah.
I think, and I really think, for practical reasons, it's beneficial for advocates of veganism to consider those one and the same. I mean, anytime you talk with a
Yeah.
non-vegan about whether, about this surviving issue, then they are like, if we say, can you survive off plants alone?
Mhm.
They'll be like, well, there's surviving and then there's thriving. That'll
Yeah.
always come into the picture. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So let's see. Okay. So we have these two cases. And yeah. Okay. So we got the guy that you created where he's what I would call vegan. Now let's look at somebody that the current vegan society definition would call vegan, which is just anybody. But let's say that this person is, and I know you've dabbled in this topic recently, and I'm very excited about it. And I actually brought up a line that you said about this to somebody I talked to recently. But let's say somebody is vegan. They do not consume meat, dairy, eggs, honey. But let's say they're overweight. They're 200 pounds overweight. And I don't know what the exact numbers would show, but when they consume their food, they're consuming like Impossible Burgers, or they're consuming vegan donuts, vegan cakes, all this kind of stuff. Their intentions are good, but animals that we know are sentient, many insects, birds that eat the insects and crop deaths and die, rodents, all these different things. If they are consuming the, basically the question would be, is it practicable to not be overweight?
I think so. I mean, in most
Yeah.
cases, I think that there's things that we can all do to get to a given weight. I mean, I think that we have genetic predispositions,
Hmm.
but that being said, I think that it's kind of, unless somebody has so many obligations in their day-to-day life that prohibit them from making healthful dietary choices and or exercising and just putting some like common sense things into practice, I think that it's practicable for everybody. I think it takes
Gotcha.
some discipline. Discipline
Yeah.
isn't easy.
Oh, it's not. No, and I know very well. I mean, I'm still a bit overweight, and I've been eating pretty much just whole food and trying to just be as healthy as I can for a couple months now. But it's tricky. Food is addictive. But here's the thing. In the same sense that somebody, almost every vegan I talk to tells this guy that's always in the chat, who is vegan except for he eats like one spoonful of honey a month or whatever, that he's clearly not vegan because he eats his honey or whatever. So I think it's safe to say, based on the Vegan Society definition, that anybody that is overweight intentionally, and I think part of it would involve the knowledge of crop deaths, which is easy to make knowledgeable. That by that definition, they wouldn't be vegan. The only reason we would want to call them vegan would be to make outsiders feel that it's not the hardest thing to be as vegan.
I think that there's something to be said for the fact that within the vegan society definition, at least, there's this idea that a vegan is an individual who would avoid cruelty toward, exploitation of, and cruelty toward animals. Um,
Okay.
and I think there's also something to be said for like, the previous iterations of the definition. I was taking a gander at the Vegan Society's website. They have a history section about the definition of veganism, and they had talked about previous definitions, previous iterations, and one of them was saying that we just should live like saying man. I mean, it was kind of just reflecting maybe the sexism of the time, but it was basically just saying like man should live without exploiting animals, I think. And then maybe an
Hmm.
updated one was like man should live without exploiting animal life for, and then there were given, purposes listed like food, maybe clothing, entertainment, etc., or for any other use kind of stuff.
Hmm.
And I don't think that growing crops that entail harm being perpetrated upon non-human animals is an example of exploiting animal life. You know what I mean?
Okay. Well, let's try to figure it out. Let's look at it. Okay, so exploitation, the action or fact of treating someone unfairly in order to benefit from their work. There's
Yeah.
various different
Yeah.
definitions, but okay. So let's see. If I were to create a concoction that could be consumed, and this concoction would attract deer, like a deer would find it desirable, and it also would kill a deer without ruining its flesh, as far as what a deer eater would call ruining. And I put this out in the forest. So as soon as a deer smelt it, it just ran over, wanted it really badly, consumed it, and died. I guess before looking at the actions afterward, would we consider that? I guess the actions afterwards is what makes it exploitation if
No,
you
no,
eat
no.
it.
It's the purpose. I mean,
Okay.
it's the like I think what you're referring to are like pesticide use basically and things like
Yeah, I
that.
mean, I'd compare more so to like rodenticide, because a pesticide, I don't know if it attracts them. But yeah, either way, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I'm saying pesticide non-specifically. I don't even
yeah,
really
you're
like
fine.
the term. I don't think that any animal is really a pest, but maybe mosquitoes,
Yeah,
but and fleas.
right.
But like what I would think of in that scenario is that is the intention behind it, and you're not
Hmm. The
with
intention is
the
to kill so you can eat.
yeah, and I wouldn't see that as exploiting of the life um
Hmm.
because here's the thing. I guess this is maybe what you were getting at when you were saying maybe it does depend on the kind of the actions that you take afterwards, because um, you're not making you're not using that life, you're not exploiting that life for a given purpose. In other words, if those animals weren't there, if you were just super paranoid, and let's say all the potential predators of those crops had already gone extinct, but you were just lacing those crops with rodenticides or pesticides or whatever kind of poison that you want to talk about, it's not to your benefit at all. You know what I mean? You
Hmm.
don't benefit from the idea unless you think you're really cool walking around like lacing your stuff with like rodenticide and stuff, and you're like, yeah, wait till those rabbits, stumble upon this. You know what I mean? Like maybe in
Hmm.
that case you're exploiting the idea of a rabbit. You know what I mean? Archetypally speaking, or something like that. But
Yeah, but I do get what you mean, and that is a good point. But you are doing an action knowing the outcome, with the outcome being what it will be. What I like to compare it to is the idea of like purchasing meat. Purchasing meat, the purchaser and the eater did not do the action, the exploitation. They are just putting it in demand, and then because they put it in demand, that's why it takes place, which
no,
is
no,
why
no.
we call that
I
wrong.
think I don't think so. I think in the case of demand, you know that this act relies on the animal dying. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? It's the animal dying sets the chain of inputs into motion. You
That's
know what
how
I mean?
that's how pesticides work.
No, because the growing of crops doesn't depend on animals being killed. It's an unfortunate and unintended consequence. It's like a
It's
it's
not
it
unintended.
no, it is.
Hypothetically, it could be unintended, but if
No,
it,
it is
yeah.
unintended because you're not inviting animals to come. Like I think there's even a difference between making, let's say you make the poison scented in a way where they're going to attract animals to come out of the forest and eat those things,
Hmm.
you know, and then they're dying, you know what I mean, as opposed to um, them being toxic to those animals. You know what I'm talking about? Like I don't think it's the ideal scenario. I think that ideally we would want to be able to grow crops and by means that don't involve hurting non-human animals. But
Hmm.
but I definitely see a big difference in paying somebody. Basically, it's like a hitman scenario in the case of animal farming,
Hmm.
versus in the scenario of putting something out to protect your crops, and then an animal happens to stumble upon it, and then they're not able um, to continue living basically because they did that. I don't think that you intended for that to happen to them. I think that you intended for that to happen, for your crops to be protected. And I think
Hmm.
that you intended for that to happen if the viability of your crops was threatened. But again, I don't even think that that's an ideal scenario. I mean, I'm not comfortable defending that position. I'm not comfortable defending the use of pesticides really that strongly.
Hmm.
I'm comfortable defending it more than animal farming, but I still don't think that that's it's kind of like the situation of being the person in Antarctica who only has access to the blubber, the whale blubber, and the penguin meat, things like that. I mean,
Hmm.
it's a less than desirable situation, and I think that if we had um, a vegan populate, like a vegan world,
Hmm.
or at least a lot more vegans, we would
Hmm.
have solutions for these things, and we wouldn't have to
Yeah.
rely on these
Would it
things.
become vegan at that time if every store, if every grocery store had a section that had apples, where there's one section that had apples and it said, no sentient animal was harmed for these apples, and then this other one said, every apple caused 3 insect deaths, and every 10 apples caused 1 bird death and 1 mouse death, or whatever. At that point, with that exact precise information, would it become? And let's say they're the same price. I don't know why anybody would want to purchase the
This
other
is
one.
kind of like that restaurant menu thing, right? Like
Yep.
if you
Yep.
had like next to the calories, if you had a breakdown of deaths. Yeah, I think I believe that when you know better, you should do better. And I think
Hmm.
that if you have a way to minimize the amount of deaths that you're causing,
Hmm.
when you contribute to one thing versus another thing. I think that especially if the costs were the same, I think that it'd be very hard to justify eating like the skillet cookie with the ice cream, causing hundreds more deaths than, you know, as opposed to eating the, let's say, I don't know, the lettuce wrap with falafel and cucumbers or something like that. If you knew that it caused a lot less death, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, I think
But so is it a vegan topic though?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I there's things that I do out of concern for non-human animals that I don't know if it has anything to do with veganism. For example,
Hmm.
there's this coconut thing. I don't know if you heard me talking about it in another stream, but in the Philippines, there's monkey slave, or sorry, in Thailand rather, maybe in the Philippines too, but definitely in Thailand, there's enslavement of monkeys in the harvesting of coconuts.
Hmm.
And people have looked into alternatives like growing like modified trees that kind of like sit lower to the ground so humans can pick them. But what happens otherwise is that basically people go into the forest, they shoot these monkey families, like the parents and stuff, who are going to try to defend the babies. Then they'll
Hmm.
take the babies away, they'll raise them, and then they'll basically train them on these like laundry line kind of things where the babies will be like strung up and kind of
Hmm.
like spinning coconuts. So they'll teach them how to basically hang by their feet. They'll kind of string them up and get them used to spinning these balls on the laundry line, because eventually what they want the monkeys to do is spin the coconuts so that the
Yeah.
coconuts kind of like spin and then twist and fall. So
Yeah, I would say that's clearly in my definition of veganism, like how I view the Vegan Society one, and for my own, which isn't too far off. I would say that factors in any actions that humans take that intentionally cause force to other animals. I think it's good to err on the side of caution and just maybe stay away from coconuts as much as possible. But especially if you knew this individual coconut or this company's coconuts were done this way, I think that's a vegan topic to
but where does,
stay
I
away
guess,
from.
like, where does the as much as possible thing come in? Because, for example, like if you're getting coconut water, it's almost always listed where the coconut water is sourced from. But for example, some things like coconut shreds on like a dessert at a restaurant or something like
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
You might not know where those coconut shreds came from,
Yeah.
or
So,
some other coconut thing in something.
well, real quick, I want to point out something that came up in the conversation I had with Angelo was so possible is possible, practicable. The only difference between the two is that it's considered able to be done successfully. So if it is practicable, then it must also be possible. So even though the word practicable is really dumb, we could set the word possible aside because practicable also means that it must be possible. But can it be done successfully? I would say, even though food addiction is tough, that not being overweight is practicable. It can be done successfully. Not eating coconuts. Now, let's assume we treated coconuts just like it was an animal food, like it was just like honey.
Yeah.
It's very easily practicable to not eat coconuts unless your financial situation affects that, or you happen to live in an area where that the financial situation affects that. But personally, in the same sense that like half the sugar out there is vegan and half isn't, based on if it comes from sugarcane or beets or whatever, we can't be spending every second of our lives torturing ourselves of figuring out how good of a vegan we are. So I don't judge. I mean, I try to judge so few people. If somebody doesn't want to look into their sugar, that's great. If somebody doesn't want to do the research on palm oil because of orangutans, we don't. A lot of people have to work like 2 full-time jobs. They don't have time for all this. So if we're just talking about the world and what's reasonable for your average person, I have zero interest in bugging people about coconut. But if we were to know that like there's a good chance like 80% of coconut products involve enslaving monkeys, I think it's perfectly fine to say you don't. Coconuts are very healthy for you, but you don't need coconuts. You can get all the nutrients from coconuts in other things. So might as well stay away from it.
I mean, it seems to work out like nicely when you kind of calculate it that way, but I guess there's just so many considerations. I mean, if
Hmm.
you think about, like, let's say you became non-vegan and you just had to come up with all these bullshit like appeals to hypocrisy that you could possibly throw at vegans to try to like absolve yourself of guilt, what would you
Hmm.
say? What are some examples of things you would say? You'd be like, you talk about crop deaths, I'm sure, right? That would be like a
Um,
big thing.
well, I like to think that in this alternate world where maybe I'm not a vegan to your average vegan, like if I was the person that you came up with in your hypothetical, like let's say I became honestly thoroughly convinced that I needed to consume meat to be healthy, and therefore I did it. I guess I would view myself the same I view myself now. I value my health and my life more than a lot of things, but once that's taken care of, then everything else is just attempting to not bring harm to sentient beings.
Sure, but
And
I
so
guess what I was trying to appeal more toward, if I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but like
you're fine.
it's all the types of harm, I guess, is what I was trying to get at. Like, I didn't want to sound like I was appealing to futility. More
Hmm.
so, I guess I'm trying to appeal to practicality in saying
Hmm.
that, I mean, there are people who will say, well, like, okay, so good for you. You might not consume any coconuts, but did you know that the soy that you're consuming is causing all these downstream effects of monocrops, and the fields are getting leveled, and the predator birds are coming in and swooping in
Yeah.
on all the helpless
Y-
mice and things like that?
Yeah, so this is why I like the idea of the definition being something like the seeks to extend moral consideration to non-human animals based on sentience. Because when somebody subscribes to a philosophy like that's what they think. I mean, nobody looks into philosophy that doesn't enjoy philosophy. And anybody that would subscribe to it without enjoying philosophy, like they're not going to waste their time pretending to do a thing that they have no interest in. So exactly what you're describing, I think most vegans just look at it as we have our obvious things: meat, dairy, eggs, honey, and then everything else is just this other stuff which some people can or cannot care about. And the problem is, in 20 years, coconuts might look like honey does now, and it's all going to change. So for me, I say people should just do their best, and I can't make people not do something that's perfectly legal to do.
Let me
And
ask you this,
so,
if I could.
yeah.
What when you say that, when you refer to a certain set of animal derived foods, I guess for the lack of a better term, as kind
Yeah.
of like the blatant, kind of obvious ones,
Hmm.
what are the qualifiers of those? Like, what makes those obviously kind of like things that vegans should avoid? Like, let's just take factory
Hmm.
farming. Like, what about that do you find especially
Yeah.
problematic or kind of like
Yeah.
counter to vegan philosophy?
Um, oh, sorry. I was about to answer that, but then I think I misunderstood it. What's counter to vegan philosophy?
I'm saying, what is it about factory farming specifically
Hmm.
that you would consider counter? For example, if somebody said that they eat, let's say they read somewhere that they're able to, um, maybe I guess this is kind of getting into the
Oh, you mean
welfareism
if somebody
topic.
was calling themselves a vegan based on my definition and they said they eat animals because it's good for them, but they ate factory farmed ones? Like, how would I describe why that's not vegan?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
I mean,
Um,
that wasn't my original question. It was more like, what is it about like meat, eggs, and dairy specifically? But
okay.
I mean, feel free to answer both.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so it's different for each person. Somebody might look at a chicken laying an egg and have like value that higher than like somebody else might. To me, different things just seem obvious or not obvious. So like when you watch Dominion and you see like the runt get picked up and while it's alive, slam down, you see the blood, you hear the squeal or whatever. People have their easy to look at things.
But I mean, in the
Mhm.
carnist quote unquote defense, that's not inherent to the practice of raising pigs for flesh, right? That's like that's
Oh, I was just going over the factory farm versus the not
but
factory
factory farms
farm.
could just stop doing that too. I
Oh,
mean, they
true.
could just reform.
Yeah, so if they reformed and factory farms became something more like regenerative farming, not that I know too much of what that is, but yeah, if you remove all the thing, if a factory farm stops cutting out the teeth, stop cutting the tail, stop doing the things, the closer you get to less harm happening, the better I'd call the situation. Now, I would say in a world where I thought people needed meat to have optimal health, that I would still think the closest thing to a moral version of that would be something like hunting. Because the idea of taking something and breeding it, every time you see a negative, right? When you see this issue happening, each issue is bad, and if you can get away from that bad, then you're good to go. If you can't get away from the killing it let's say hypothetically you need that to be at the health that you want to be at. If you go from 50% to 100% health, so in the eyes of a non-vegan, or at least the non-standard vegan, that they need that for health, but they would hate to ever harm an animal. If somebody kicked a puppy or whatever, they'd be sad. Now, if they broke down all the ideas and realized how hypocritical they are, then they would probably end up at something like trying to cause the least amount of harm possible to consume their meat.
What do you think about a scenario where let's say you're out on the street and let's say you're showing slaughterhouse footage to passerbys and somebody is walking
Mm-hmm.
by and they say, "Oh my God, I can't look at that. If I keep watching that, I'm going to stop eating meat." Like, I guess what would
Yeah.
your thoughts be
I would
about
say
that?
keep watching that and stop eating meat.
Yeah. Um,
um,
it's just
yeah.
kind of interesting because even in the cases of like when we talk about like high welfare scenarios, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I would think that a lot of times if people actually kind of expose themselves to what's actually happening in those scenarios, like especially the slaughterhouse floor, that kind of thing, I
Yeah.
mean, they would still be horrified. It wouldn't matter if and of course, like, you know, these quote unquote high welfare farms that we talk about,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that it's better or worse. I'm just saying they all go to the same slaughterhouse, whether, you know,
Mm-hmm.
whether they're factory farmed or kind of high welfare farmed animals, they're shipped off to
Mm-hmm.
a slaughterhouse unless they're being slaughtered and packed on the farm itself, which is exceedingly rare. And I'm not saying it's better. But I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of times when we consider these welfare um, you know, there have been investigations that look into what the conditions are in a lot of the different farms that people will tout as being high welfare. And lo and behold, you know, the conditions are horrific, and yet
Yeah.
these places are like high welfare certified. And I think that something that it eventually does is like it kind of takes away from um, the overall message of not viewing animals as just basically having the basic right to their life if we focus so much on the treatment. Like I've seen cases where people will basically like get so hooked on to like basically single issue campaigns
Mm-hmm.
where it's almost like they're implicitly advertising or not advertising maybe, but signing off on, I guess, the
Mm.
alternative uses of things. Like, for example, fur is like a really low hanging fruit, where, you know, I think if I understand correctly, you're more of the idea that like if we could get fur abolished, that'd be great. And it would kind of be like a good
Mm-hmm.
first step and incremental step and things like that. And I don't know that I necessarily disagree. I don't think it would be a bad thing if the
Mm-hmm.
sale of fur was banned, you know, let's say nationwide. I don't think that would be a bad thing at all. I would be happy if that happened.
Mm-hmm.
But it kind of reminds me of like, I don't know if you're familiar with this dog and cat meat trade act, but it's something that former President Trump actually signed into law, where he made, I believe it's the sale or the trade maybe of dog
Mm-hmm.
and cat flesh illegal in the United States.
Mm.
So um, I don't know. Like, do you think that it's not a tongue in cheek question. It's more just like kind of like, I'll just say, I guess maybe it is a rhetorical question though. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that this really impacted the dog and cat meat market in the US very much.
Yeah, it might not. I mean, I think laws are everything. I think that without laws, like in a sense, nothing matters. If it wasn't illegal to kill people, then we'd have more people killing people. But what I will say,
But let me just, if I could just ask you this, like
yeah,
in the, like, let's say that there's an animal, like if we could know that, let's say lobsters, if we knew that they were less sentient, whatever that meant,
uh-huh.
than dogs and cats, if you had the choice of two laws being applied to the US where you knew that you could either apply a law to the US with the current consumption of dogs and cats that people are engaged in the US versus applying a law to the US where the current lobster consumption of the US, the way that it is basically made illegal. And for all intents and purposes, let's just say that people follow the law and it stops. Isn't it better to basically to do the thing that I guess actually has an impact, to put the
Yeah.
laws into effect that actually impact
Um,
society?
yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't want to make a stance at this moment on if it should be illegal to eat meat, because it's just so complicated.
Yeah,
But
and I'm not
but
asking
I
you to do
agree with
that.
you. But yes, it would be better to make a law to make it illegal to cut out pig teeth than to make it illegal to sell cat and dog meat, for sure.
But
Because
do you
it would
think
have
that
a bigger impact. Yeah.
but you think that it should be illegal to cut out pigs' teeth, but not illegal to slit their throats?
Correct. It would it depend on what we figure out as far as because honestly, I think here's the thing: we have to decide if we think that people are convinced that they need animal flesh to be healthy. And even though I'm convinced and you're convinced, and there's plenty of anecdotal evidence with people that have lived 50, 60, many years eating whole foods and being perfectly fine, and we have all these studies and all this stuff is great. I don't know what level it needs to get to make
Mhm.
it illegal. But
What
if people,
level, I'm sorry, when you say what level it needs to get to make it illegal, by saying it, is that
the
signifying
understanding of how
of
we can
health?
be fine, because to tell even one person you must sacrifice this much health for the sake of us protecting the animals, it's just really complicated. It's I think it's easy for us to look at in this world of leisure that we have, but imagining people struggling to survive, and it's just complicated. I think that there will be a future where it will and should be illegal. But hold on, I want to answer your question real quick because I think this will kind of explain what matters to me with welfareism. Is if you take everything that is wrong, if you take a cow, a pig, take all these animals, and take humans, and let's say you make a list of everything that's wrong from the least important to the most important. So let's call the most important death, okay? And then let's call the least important ownership, and then everything else, because you could own something, you could take a cow and own it and not let it leave, but your property is huge and it has the greatest life and it lives forever and it's your best friend and you pet it all the time. But we can still call it bad that it is enclosed and owned of some kind. But then you have all these different situations, and let's say when it comes to humans in a society, let's just say the U.S. for fun, let's say there are 0 laws. You can do whatever you want to an animal. You can stab it for fun. You can fornicate with it. You can do whatever you want. You can
It's
eat
kind of an
animals.
interesting example because in my mind, the presence of a legal system is what um, is it's almost counterintuitive to think that a legal system allows ownership of other animals. You know what I mean? It's almost
Mhm.
like the way I see legality is it's something that it should protect beings from being owned.
Oh, for
But
sure.
yeah,
I think it should, but let's just say let's say in this society because there currently are laws about dogs and stuff. That football player kicked a cat and got in a lot of trouble. But let's say there are no laws involving non-human animals, and there are laws involving humans, like stealing from each other and killing and all that stuff. Okay, but imagine a list to whatever the worst thing is right before
yeah,
death, and then the worst thing before that, and you have all
yeah.
these things. You have cutting pig's teeth. You have all these different things, and none of them are illegal. In my mind, what we should try to do is get as many of these billions or trillions of possible things you can imagine illegal until they're all illegal. If it is legal to stab a cow over and over, but keep it alive and then keep stabbing it, that should become illegal. Now, that doesn't mean that I think, oh, okay, it's okay to kill them and eat them and whatever. That just means that any of the things on this entire spectrum, humans, cows, whatever, if we can make one illegal, that's great. And while they're currently legal, that should be not legal, right? Like if there was with humans, we have it almost all taken care of aside from maybe like circumcision or something. But imagine there was like 10 things left with humans where humans like can beat up other humans and stab other humans and it's perfectly legal. It wouldn't be let's make all that illegal now or nothing. It would be any of these becoming illegal is a win, and it's a big win.
So let me ask you this. Like, let's say you were king of the world and you didn't
Okay.
have to make laws with any kind of like due process. You didn't have to be concerned with, people voting for it or not voting for it or overthrowing you as the king. And you would basically be able to make laws and you would be able to enforce them. So people wouldn't be able to kind of like open up like kind of underground markets and things like that. You'd be able to know that people were going to have to live with it.
Mm-hmm.
Would let's say like if you were also the orator of the law, so you were responsible for kind of announcing it to the people and answering like any questions that they might have about it and things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
you were like, okay, world, cutting pigs' teeth out is now illegal. And then somebody said to you, King Carson, what about killing them? Like, can we still do that? You would say yes, right? And then you would say basically like, I don't think it's the time yet to make that act illegal, right? Or is that a
I think
misrepresentation?
so. I don't know. I'm torn. If right now it became illegal to kill and eat animals in the U.S., I don't think I would fight it. I just don't know. And in
Yeah, why
fact,
on earth would you?
if it was up for a vote, I think I might vote for it. I would just be, I just,
I
I
mean, there'd be
wouldn't.
other things to
Mhm.
consider, of course, like, what
Yeah.
happened with prohibition and underground markets and things like that. I mean, of course,
Well, I'm
and
not worried
also,
about that. If something's wrong, I think it should be illegal. And then if people do it in a bad way that causes other harm, then that's just something that we would try to fight. But the wrong thing, if it should be illegal. But
I
no,
guess
I
what I'm,
just yeah.
I was going to say, what I'm trying to get at is like with the king scenario is that basically there is to some level some implicit understanding of being complicit with something if
Hmm.
if you say that like if you say that XYZ actions are wrong and should be abolished, you ought to have very good reason for not wanting, ABC actions against the same set of victims
Hmm.
to remain legal. You should have very good contextual reasons for those things remaining legally okay to do. You know what I mean? Especially like, if somebody were to run the name the trait thing against you and just be like, would you feel this way against humans? Like if you knew that there was a group of humans who were the victims of institutionalized discrimination and they were having bad things happen to them, would you hold that they should be having these bad things happening to them short of death be made illegal, but that they should still be getting killed totally, for
Yeah.
arbitrary discriminatory reasons?
Yeah, so the reason name the trait doesn't work specifically for me and with laws is because I don't think laws on humans should be based on morals at all. I don't think we need to. We can get around that completely. I think laws when it comes to animals are all moral based.
Somebody could ask you to name the trait on that though too. I'm not
Mhm.
asking you to do those things. I don't
Mhm.
particularly like employing it, and I don't really see much.
But it would come down to something like the crop death thing. Like we can say, we can word however we want of what leads to these deaths. But if we intentionally do a thing that causes these deaths, we can say like, there's a certain amount of value we have for our own health and our own survival. So even though we don't want these insects dead, if this is our only option right now, we will let this happen. I guess
But
I'm
it's not the
nervous
only
not.
option, right? It's like let me ask you this. I've
Well,
been wanting to
until
ask.
it's not. Well, it is in a sense, right? Like you're probably going to eat something today that caused crop deaths.
Sure, causing harm. Yeah, I'm not talking about that, but I
Mhm.
mean, just like I thought we were on the topic of making flesh like illegal or not.
Yeah, I was just comparing it to that. I was saying like in a perfect world where we can advance things and make it illegal, and we figure out a way to make crops that don't cause the deaths, then we do that. So same thing where if we can figure out a way to make it to where everybody can thrive and survive and all that good stuff and have good health without killing animals, that should be the law. That
Yeah.
should
What
be
do you
yeah.
feel about like, well, I mean, without killing animals, I guess that's convoluted, right? Because of aforementioned crop deaths and stuff. But how would you feel about,
Mhm.
like, what I was trying to say earlier? I don't know if I kind of wasn't really clear on this, but like the exploitation of and cruelty to within the
Mhm.
vegan definition is, I think, really important because the way that I understand it, it's not exploitation or cruelty; it's both.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess how would you feel about? It's almost like a trait stack in a way. The trait of this harmful behavior, which involves exploitation and
Mhm.
cruelty. Like, I guess.
Neither of those words mean anything to me.
Hmm.
Well, the reason, so I reword it in mine. I don't know if I reword it, but the way I change it is negative rights to these animals by intentional use of force. So I don't care if it's described as exploitation. I don't care if it's described as cruel. I don't think we should do any use of force to animals. Different people could call things cruel or not cruel. Somebody might say a 5-year-old on a horse isn't cruel because the 5-year-old's so light. I don't think we should do any force whatsoever. So that detail just doesn't matter to me, which is why with the crop deaths, the only reason I'm fine with crop deaths is because I think the healthiest thing, I eat organic stuff, but I think some crop deaths comes from that. So if the healthiest thing for me to eat and consume and be healthy, which I'm convinced of, would be fruits, veggies, nuts, seeds, just whole foods, and that causes some crop deaths, um, in the nicest way possible. I don't care. It's a bummer, but I'm going to consume these things to be healthy. But I would consider it, even if these words that we might say matter to us, like exploitation and cruelty. If I eat a vegan donut that is not going to help my health, and that kills sentient beings. I'm not saying we have to be the most perfect and like affect our lives, like saving the children in the river nonstop or whatever. We have to live still, but if I can stop and look and go, that vegan donut, I'm addicted and that looks good and I want that really bad. If I consume that, it doesn't matter if I'm overweight or not. That is not healthy for me. That's not a thing that any animal's body wants in its body. And by wants I mean like as far as nutritious. Um, and sentient beings died for that. I don't care. I don't care if it's called either of those two words,
Exploitation,
exploitation
cruelty,
or
yeah.
cruelty. Yeah. Um, which there is cruelty, but you could define it as the cruelty wasn't caused intentionally because the pesticides were left and then something came to it. That seems like a way for somebody to get out of something happening. Somebody can feel justified in it. I think people are justified taking care of pests and rodents in their house to not destroy like if ants are in your food and you don't have a crazy amount of money to share your food with ants, and if rodents are chewing up your foundation and you can't afford to just keep buying new houses that you got to do what you got to do. But as soon as you can do something better, um, I I'm gonna stop rambling because I forgot exactly what I was
No, it's all right.
responding
I
to.
mean, I
But
think
yeah.
you're responding to, I guess, my assertion that I think
Mm-hmm.
that there should be a clear line that we can set where the acts that are done, like there is a possible wording. I don't have it at the ready right now, but I think that there is a possible wording where it's very clear that what somebody is involved in is direct exploitation of life, of animal life, where that
Mm-hmm.
life of that animal is a necessary input and it's being used as a means of production. You know what I mean? For example, like the
Mm.
coconut example with the monkeys, like their
Yep.
labor is being used obviously against their will with a means of as a means of production.
Mm-hmm.
In the crop death scenario, that is immune to criticisms of that definition because their lives aren't being used as means of production. So
Yeah.
I think that there's definitely something to be said for whether or not the animal exploitation or animal killing is
Mm-hmm.
in a vacuum, a necessary input for that thing to be produced.
Yeah, I guess I just feel like that whatever, however you describe it, it should be factored into veganism. Imagine there was a out in nature, there was some kind of a something that you could consume, and let's say that there was an animal that survives well on that, like that's its main source of food, and you don't need it. It's not healthy to you, but you can consume it, and you like the taste of it, and it's just growing on this plant, and this animal's about to come up to it and eat it, and you shoot that animal falls over dead, and you go get the we'll just say it's an apple or whatever, but we'll pretend this type of apple is not healthy for humans. Not that that matters, but it adds a nice little touch. And you shoot this thing let's say it looks like a deer or something. You shoot this deer that was about to eat this apple because you wanted the apple, and the deer was going to eat it. And then you eat it. Does this not fit into veganism?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like your hypothetical with, you were saying that like if you were stuck on an island with somebody and you didn't have anything to eat except for, maybe if you could kill them and eat them, you would kill the human or something
Yeah, let's
like
say
that.
this human is totally healthy, beyond healthy. They have extra pounds.
So you're
They're
left on
good.
an island with somebody and there's literally just one apple like between you guys. And let's
No,
say
no,
that
no. This person lives in a society. They have all the food in the world. That we can call them super fit. They're huge, like vegan gains, or they can be whatever you want to call them. They have endless. They have grocery stores, but they just come out. They're going for a hike for fun, and they're not even hungry.
but
But
you're
that app
starving or
that
something on this
that
island.
no, no, no. This person's not hungry at all,
No, no.
and
Are
they
you starving though on the island? Like
oh
in
on
this
the
hypothetical?
in a separate hypothetical.
Oh no, I thought that part of the hypothetical was that. I'm sorry, I must
No, no,
have.
no. So I'm just saying a person. I'm just saying a random person. We'll call him Bob. Bob lives in society. He has all the food in the world.
And you do
He's.
too, right?
There's no me. I'm not. I don't
Oh, okay.
exist here. Bob wanders off to go on a hike, and he has a gun, and he sees this tree growing this food that humans can consume. He doesn't need it. It's not necessarily. It's not healthy for him or anything. It's scientifically known. Like you do not need this thing, and not only that, he's eaten double the amount he needs to eat today, and he has an endless supply of food for the next 10 years. But he sees this deer that's going to go eat
And
this
that's
apple.
that's the vegan donut, and then the deer is
Yeah, sure.
basically the
Yeah,
crop deaths.
yeah. Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And he sees it, go up to it, and he could just let it eat it, but he shoots it. He's not going to eat the deer. He just shoots the deer, lets it fall, and then he gets it and he eats it. He takes a bite and he's like, actually, I didn't even eat it, and tosses it. Is it to me how I view veganism, whether it fits into current words or not, that should factor in when us vegans and fellow future vegans discuss what's right or wrong. Separate from it being right or wrong outside of veganism, what I mean is right or wrong within veganism.
Yeah, within veganism, I mean, it seems like the kind of like, the health-based arguments kind of factor into that slightly as it is. But of
Mhm.
course, you'll see health-based stuff also kind of detract from the ethical stuff a lot
Well, let's
within
ignore
veganism.
that you know my trick. So let's just look at it as this person shoots a deer that's about to eat an apple.
What's the trick?
Well, you know that I'm comparing the apple to a donut and the shooter to crop dust. But let's just set that aside for a second. If we were just looking at like this thing that's normal, the amount of people that go out deer hunting, let's just say those people in real life, but it's hypothetical, go out shooting deer so they could eat the deer's food. So let's ignore comparing it to crop deaths.
I don't
Is
think I
this not
can
some?
ignore that though. I mean,
Well, only
you
because you want crop dust to not be factored into
no, no,
veganism.
no. I do want crop deaths to be factored
Oh,
in
okay, okay,
to
okay.
some degree. Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of um, I forgot who it was. There was a comment on one of the recent discussions I had with Akash about the concept of scalar consequentialism.
Hmm.
I really hate that I can't give credit to the person who wrote that, but
Hmm.
it's kind of this idea of like if I'm representing it correctly, it's like this idea of the decisions that we make being kind of assessed in terms of um, kind of like how easy or how hard they are for us to avoid, and then kind of like how much harm or not harm they cause. And basically, obviously in the case of avoiding vegan donuts, it's easy to do. You know what I mean? It's not something that is hard to do. Whereas let's say the case of driving your car if you need to go to work, or walking outside if you just, need to enjoy being outside for your own sanity or something like that. Being, if we consider those like the harder things to avoid, I think it's easy to kind of come up with an ethical framework where you're able to still live your life and be healthy, and still kind of like be conscientious about the harm that you cause, in terms of not causing more harm than you could easily avoid causing, if that makes sense. Like I think the avoidability factor is important. And like I said, like I was the person who came up with that idea about having the kill count or whatever next to the calorie count. So I'm all for that. And I think that
when over time different things become more reasonable, like us talking about it as if it's like, oh man, it's really hard to factor in crop deaths. There's a chance in 20 years people will look back at us and go, those guys weren't vegan. What the fuck was wrong with them?
Sure.
Because it'll become so much easier in the future.
Sure. That's a salient point. What kind of comes to mind right now for me is this idea of telling people that they can go vegan and that it's very easy, and that all they would need to do, in order to live a, let's say, cruelty-free lifestyle, would be to just replace all the animal derived things that they eat in such a way where they are just replacing them with the vegan alternatives to those things. So like, for example, rather than eating quote unquote beef, go eat Beyond Beef, and rather than eating quote unquote chicken fingers, go eat the Gardein or the Daring ones or whatever. In doing so, we're basically, in a way, we are authorizing the use of force, to kind of harken back to your definition, against certain non-human animals, preferentially over other non-human animals.
Well, and that's the most important part of the writing I'm trying to do. We can ignore the fact that I'm trying to change the definition, but I'm trying to point out how much of a spectrum this must be, until it's not. I mean, there might be a future with certain types of like veganic farming and what's a vertical farming or whatever, that it might get to the point where somehow we figure out, like in the future, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, 1,000,000 years from now, people might look back and go, what the heck? They did things that needed to cause harm. Now we don't cause any harm.
Let me ask you this.
Until then, it's a spectrum. But yeah, what's up?
So as far as, how some products are certified vegan, for example, if your redefinition were widely adopted, would you be okay with like certain things like that, like, certain products, let's say cow flesh products, etc., having like a vegan certification on them?
Gotcha. Before I answer that, I wanted to let you know that I was listening carefully while also looking it up, and it was Jeremy Gord.
Oh, okay, yeah, cool. Yeah, Jeremy said that he had talked about that. So yeah, that was Jeremy. I think there's some wisdom to that.
I was just going to say, so we can use the word vegan in various different ways, calling something a vegan thing, without it necessarily meaning that, like when you go to a restaurant and you see like what's on the vegan menu, you're not seeing what's on the ethical menu, like the philosophy menu. You're just seeing the standard of what we view as considered vegan. Correct. Today. Yeah. So in the sense that right now there's nothing factoring in crop deaths on a vegan menu. In the future, if that becomes the standard, or to say like if there's coconut in there, maybe in the future that won't be on the vegan menu. But still, people can pick and choose what they're going to consume. Some people might ignore the idea of gelatin. Who knows? Especially in supplements.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't subscribe to being vegan just for the sake of it. I mean, like, if I went to a restaurant and they had a vegan menu, which was all the plant-based stuff, and then they had a menu that was like, this is the ethical menu, And that one was, let's say it was vegan by default. It's like the square is a rectangle, or square is not a rectangle, but rectangle is a square thing. Like if there
Mhm.
was an ethical menu that was also vegan, but then let's say they excluded all coconut products and they excluded all palm oil and whatever other things that let's say the restaurant had to obtain by questionable means, I would
Mhm.
still say that I would go with the quote unquote ethical menu. As long as it was all plant based, I wouldn't just go with the vegan one just because. I wouldn't be like, oh, I'm vegan, so I'm going to go with the vegan menu. I'd be like,
Right.
I'd go with the ethical menu that also happens to be vegan friendly, in line with the
Yeah.
principles of veganism. I really hate that I got to get going here in a little bit
Oh,
because
you're
I feel
fine.
like we didn't really get to talk about the welfareism stuff very much at all.
Oh,
Um,
it's fine. I think we talked about plenty. Do you want to hop off here right now, or do you want me to answer
um,
that question? Or
about the menus.
yeah,
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead. I can
yeah.
still take a couple more minutes here.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I think words can be used in different ways. W- uh, Again, like anytime you use a word, it's just saying like, as of right now, this aligns with this. When I first became vegan, the first time I ever became vegan was like 20 years ago. Nobody was talking about honey or makeup or anything like that. It's just things slowly change over time. And so something, a restaurant calling their food whatever it is, I still think it would be best to refer to certain foods as the vegan foods. But it really would just come down to whatever somebody wants to do. If it became popular, if all of a sudden veganism went from whatever 5-10% it is now to like 30%, because now all these people are joining the conversation and they're truly actively trying to harm less animals and doing their best, and they fit my definition.
But
If
they're
that
still eating like meat, eggs, and dairy from
Some of
select.
them, yeah, I would imagine that anybody that's vegan now and then future people that don't want to consume any, I doubt they would want to consume meat because some other people that are calling themselves vegan are consuming meat. But yeah, if it became popular enough that part of what was talked about as vegan was these like ethical ways to treat animals, if some of these people were still convinced that they needed to eat animals, it would just be up to a restaurant's choices. If a restaurant said, I'm going to refer to this as vegan, and then when people find out that there's ethically raised beef or something, then people might just start boycotting that place and not go. So whatever
But
the outcomes are, what they are, I really just think it comes down to, does the philosophy have a focus on not unneededly treating animals bad? And me and you currently treat pests and birds and rodents bad because we have to, and some other people might treat cows bad because they think they have to. We just all have to be honest with ourselves and
wait,
try our
if I could just
best.
ask, did you say that I heard you say something about the people who like already consider themselves vegan? Did you say that you doubt that they'd want to stop calling themselves vegan just because other people who don't fit their
Oh,
definition are, or that they
that
wouldn't want to call themselves vegan
that too,
anymore?
but no, I was saying I doubt they would stop being the vegans they are. Like I doubt they would look at my definition and go, "Oh, well, if these people are going to call themselves vegan and eat meat, I guess I'm going to eat meat too." Like they're
Yeah.
not going to do
No,
that.
they
Like,
wouldn't
yeah.
do that, but I think that there's an extremely real possibility of those people, including myself, not
Mhm.
wanting to call ourselves vegan anymore and come up with a new term.
Oh,
Because
interesting. Okay.
this is essentially what happened with the term vegetarian, because vegetarian initially meant somebody who lives off vegetation, and
Mhm.
people who ate, let's say, cheese and ice cream and drank milk, they would call themselves lacto vegetarians. And then if they
Mm.
also consumed eggs, they would be lacto ovo vegetarians. And then people just, I guess, got sick of saying lacto ovo vegetarian, because now, vegetarian is a term that ubiquitously just means somebody who doesn't consume animal flesh, but consumes other types of animal secretions, things like that. So I think I definitely, like, I don't want to be known as a person who participates in those things.
Mm.
I want to be known as somebody who boycotts those things. That's the whole political element of it to me. If I
Yeah.
didn't identify myself as somebody who's vegan, that's the only utility of the term to me. It's not
Gotcha.
it's
No,
not so I can.
that's a fair point too. That alone is my only concern with the definition being as broad as it is. But I don't know any other way around it. But next time we talk, maybe you can convince me of slight changes to work around it. But yeah,
Yeah,
if you gotta hop off, I don't want to keep you any longer. I
yeah.
might
The
stay
only
and
other
chat
thing,
with chat,
sure.
but
The only other thing I was going to say is just with regard to the, I guess with regard to welfareism, the thing that I would wonder in terms of how it would impact the future of animals, like, into the future. If, let's say, we had a population that, let's say, like, is for all intents and purposes all vegan. And when I say vegan, I'm referring to, like, your kind of the new definition. Uh, let's say NU, like, like new metal. Let's say they're
Mhm.
new vegan, and they only consume, like, uh, high, quote unquote, high welfare, regeneratively farmed um, animal flesh, and they don't consume more than they ought to, by their estimations, for their health.
Mhm.
And they're only consuming, like, quantities and everything that they've carefully calculated they would need to for protein requirements or what have you. Um,
Mhm.
and let's say the animals in all these situations, not only is it, like, as high welfare as the highest welfare places are now, but
Mhm.
that because they do care about animals and they are hanging around vegans and they're all talking about philosophy and ethics, let's
Mhm.
say that they don't slit animals' throats. They've come up with a way to kind of, like, painlessly kill these animals in their sleep.
Mhm.
And let's say there's even a way to technologically generate so much, like, lab-grown food and flesh, lab-grown flesh kind of stuff. And let's say vertical farming has become very efficient. People are using hydrogen cells and solar power at an extremely efficient rate. So these buildings have, like, let's say there's huge skyscrapers that have a negative carbon footprint. They're actually, to the extent that they're environmentally beneficial. They, like, let's say they secrete more oxygen into the air as a process of this whole process. How would we convince those people who are eating these animals, who had, like, an absolutely zero carbon footprint, if not, like, a negative carbon footprint, and who were dying in completely painless ways, who, let's say, like, they all had, like, Apple VR headsets while they were alive, and they were just,
Mhm.
like, in cow heaven. And then even when they took their headsets off, they were just, like, really happy and surrounded by their families, had everything that they needed to survive. They were getting massages all day. There were, like, AI robots just, like, playing with them and stuff all day.
Mhm.
Like, this isn't a completely untenable, unforeseeable kind
Yeah.
of
No, I know
scenario.
the answer.
I guess, like, well, my question might surprise you. So my question is, how do we convince those people at that
Mhm.
point to stop participating in those things? How do we convince
Yeah.
them to go, like, vegan?
It would be something like the answer to any case of anything wrong. If something wrong is still happening, then there should be a good argument for why it shouldn't happen.
I guess what would make it wrong in that case, though?
Well, if well, it would depend. If
And
they,
I mean, and just to be clear, I do think it's wrong, but I'm just
yeah.
trying to understand, I guess, like,
So, like
what
in
would
my
make it wrong.
mind, since we don't like if everybody had my mind, not my mind, but my mind in the sense of feeling comfortable that we don't need meat to survive, then what would make it wrong is since you don't need it, then you don't need to kill something for no reason. And so it'd be hard to convince somebody that thinks you need it to survive, but they think you need it to survive. So they'd be like a person now that's not vegan whatsoever that thinks you need it to
But
survive.
in this scenario, if they're being
Mhm.
if they're being bred and living out their whole lives, they're dying of old age. They're
Mhm.
just in these, like, huge, simulated outdoor environments or something, but they're happy. Let's say, we're doing, like, we have this kind of open air MRI kind of stuff where we're looking at their brain states. They're not under stress at all, and they're just dying from old age. They get to live their whole life with their family, but let's just say they're, like, in captivity.
Yeah, it's
Um,
the Peter Singer farm. Yeah. Um,
it's not even the Pinger Singer farm. It's the farm where they
I was just
literally.
joking, but yeah. No,
but
no,
but I'm
no,
saying
no.
in this case, you're
Huh?
not even killing them. They're just complete. You're just eating carcasses of animals that you bred into existence.
Oh,
So
sorry. Okay, I thought you were talking about actually killing them.
no, no, no.
Why would we want to convince them to stop doing that unless they were convinced of it
Well,
for
I'm
health
saying because in
reasons?
this case, you're breeding them into existence, and you're kind of giving them this, like, artificial life, and you're basically, like, the cause. Like, I guess, do you see
I
that?
might
Do
have
you
missed
see?
part of it. There's an animal being bred into existence.
Yeah, let's say there's like a huge vertical farm. It's like the size of like a stadium in its width, but then it's just like 200 stories high, and it's just this like gigantic carbon negative indoor environment where you just
Hmm.
have these huge like terrarium ecosystems. It's like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. It's just beautiful inside, very
Hmm.
engaging, just this like utopic, amazing environment.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's animals being bred in there by the thousands. They're
Yeah, that
living
would
out
be the
their
wrong
whole
thing.
lives.
I would just call it. I'd call it wrong to, again, wrong to intentionally force anything on anything. To force breeding. I don't know if that if there's any amount of force other than just letting them procreate on their own.
And if
Then
they
that
are
would be the wrong.
procreating on their own, then would you see anything wrong with it? If they're procreating on their own, dying of natural causes, being well cared for, they get the best care. Like imagine there's this like company like in the Power Rangers, like how Zordon's face comes in that vestibule thing. They're like,
Mhm.
there's this overseer, and he's like, our animals get the best possible care. It's in this like future,
Yeah.
society where it's like this company's making mad bank off this.
Yeah, it would come down to what's possible. So right now, us people that care about sentient beings have to be somewhat accepting of crop deaths. Um, and so in this case, if you had a world that say you needed these cows for their manure or something, then yeah, if you needed it, then you'd need it. If you do not need it, then the force becomes the problem. The force at all is the problem.
But in
I
this case, the
uh
only force, like let's say we're not breeding them into existence, they're breeding by themselves.
Yeah,
So
the force is that they're in the building.
that's the only force. It's just a confinement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say that sounds a billion times better than what we currently have, but I would still call it force, and I'd call it unnecessary force. And I'd want to convince anybody that we shouldn't make these animals live in this certain place. It's a complicated topic because I don't know if I think there's a certain amount of land that any species, including humans, should be able to take up. So if we kept taking up land, then essentially we're forcing animals in what's left. And so I don't know. It's a problem. I don't know how to solve that one. But as far as what is left of nature, if you have animals out in nature, then that's where I think it should be as of right now. And so anything where we have a man-made thing that something can't leave from, my argument to anybody would be we shouldn't do this. But I don't know if I could convince them of that if they felt we needed the animals in some way or another to be healthy and survive.
Yeah. I was just, the point of that question is more for me to try to figure out where exactly you believe that the wrongdoing is.
Mm-hmm.
If we remove the forcible breeding from the scenario, if we remove the killing from the scenario, I'm trying to think of a scenario. I mean, even if we could
It's
remove the
every element of
confinement.
force. Every element of force. If they're fenced in, then it's bad. If they are being touched, it's bad. Everything's bad if there is an element of force that is known or likely to be unwanted. I sat down with my buddy Michael and discussed all the different options of possible interactions with animals where you can get joy and where it's acceptable. And it's various different things. Like if you're out in the wild and some wild dog comes up and just starts wrestling with you and playing with you. And if you have a cabin out in the woods that has no door and the dog comes in and lays by your side but can leave at any time. There's a handful of small examples of interactions that are probably risky and you shouldn't do, where a human can interact with an animal and you can get joy from it. So it's a form of exploitation, but where it's not at the animal's expense. But outside of a couple situations of actually playfully interacting and not the second it wants to move. I think we even got it to the level where if somebody was a weirdo that saw a cow that had milk in it and like went down and started drinking from its udder, if the cow didn't leave, I don't even know if I would even factor that in. But as soon as you tie something up or fence it in or hold it still, I would consider anything involving sentient beings to be wrong, and I would hope to convince others of that.
Yeah, I think when it pertains to like sexual acts with animals, animals involving their like udders and things like that, I think that's definitely brings up the issue of consent and stuff. But as
I
far
wasn't
as
thinking of that as sexual, but no, fair point, I guess. Yeah.
but yeah, as far as the use of force stuff, that's mega base. But hey, I got to get running. But thanks a
Yeah.
lot for the talk, and thanks for everybody in the comments and chat. And sorry if I couldn't respond to anybody's comments, but This was a lot of fun, Carson. Hopefully we'll do it
Yeah.
again soon.
Yeah, let's do it.
All
Take
right.
care, man.
Yep.
See
Take
ya.
care.
All right. Cool. That was a good talk. Yeah, I wish sometimes when I do talks, they're not so focused, and I'm able to respond to chat more. And there was a whole bunch of things. Jeremy, I don't know if you're still in there, but you had a bunch of really great questions for me to ask Haz, and I just didn't get around to it. So sorry about that. I liked those challenges. But yeah, yeah, that was a good talk. I kind of feel like talk ready. If anybody else wants to hop on here and chat, let me know. Because I don't mind chatting for a few more minutes. If anybody heard anything in there that they want to challenge, then yeah, go for it. Let's see. Unethical farming is growing. Dish meat. Yeah, it's a bummer. I think sometimes people are called trolls in comments that I don't agree with, but it's a bummer when they actually do exist. Like when there's somebody that just like is filling all the space with stuff where they don't want conversation. They just want to throw in some random nonsense. But I actually I see it from time to time, but I like a good portion of the people that some other people call trolls. As long as they're not putting too many comments and they're actually wanting to share ideas and spread conversation. Troll lives matter. Hey, Lewis, you want to hop on here and chat for a sec? Oh, and Michael, I have not responded to your message. I'm waiting to hear back from Harley, but hopefully we're going to set up that talk soon. Let's see. Okay. Vegan Dawn says lab-grown meat is highly unethical. Growing animal cells is still animal flesh, and this is definitely cruelty. And this is definitely cruelty-free. Oh, I see. But not vegan, and only the right kind of veganism can be ethical. And only the right kind of veganism. I don't know what that right kind of veganism is referring to. And calling it cruelty-free but not vegan, that's the thing. A lot of people think of veganism as being this like rigid idea of it means this. So even if it's not immoral, but you get outside of this idea, then there's a problem. And it's kind of like the idea of a true accidental hitting a deer with a car and then somebody eating that roadkill. Like that's kind of what factors in with this growing cells and whatever. If there is not a sentient being that is actively being forced into anything or being killed, then I don't get the idea of wanting to factor that into veganism. I mean, no offense at all. Everybody should have their different take. I just really don't get that. I do not get that one at all. Lab-grown meat is far away from whole foods, which I believe are healthier choice, and it is ethical to strive for the best. Yeah, I think it's best to be as healthy as possible for sure. And lab-grown meat, I wouldn't factor in as whole foods. It's complicated, but yeah, I wouldn't. But if it's not causing any harm, I would say ethically lab-grown meat would be better for you than would be more ethical than eating anything that causes crop deaths. But again, I wouldn't eat it just because it causes less crop deaths. I would want to eat what's healthy for me, followed by that. Lewis says, "What's the subject of the chat?" Whatever you want to chat about. We can chat about crop deaths. We can chat about whatever. I'm putting this here. And if Lewis wants to copy and paste that into a thing and appear here, then that would be cool. I actually probably only have like 10 or 15 minutes, but I just... yeah, I love breaking these things down. I love learning and hearing new ideas and thinking things through. And so maybe that's why I find it so challenging to get myself to hop off of live streams. Because, yeah, I really enjoy talking about these things. While I'm waiting to see if Lewis does want to show up, I'm going to go back and read something Jeremy wrote. This was something he wanted me to ask Haz, But he said, what if someone were using extremely painful poisons on mentally disabled humans who couldn't resist stomping on their sensitive lawn? Let's see. So yeah, because that's the idea of what we're talking about is when is it acceptable to poison things? Because you can poison rats to grow your food. So at what point can you not? And I think there are cases where it's perfectly reasonable. But there are cases where it's not, which is why I feel like it's completely on a spectrum. Lewis, yes. Daniel says, I would say it's not vegan to eat roadkill. Why do out of respect for the creature? Yeah, that's the thing. We can each have our different opinion of like, oh, I don't want to do this out of respect. I don't, this, that, or the other. In my mind, veganism is about it's a moral philosophy. It's about if you are doing something wrong, and somebody can call something wrong that isn't causing harm. I just view like somebody can say wearing a hat into a building is wrong because somebody might view it as disrespectful because it was a norm for so long or whatever, and there might be something to that, and that might be a conversation worth having. I guess in my mind, what I want veganism to mean and what I feel like it mostly means is it's referring to a wrong action based on a sentient being that can perceive things. It can feel pain. It can have its wants, and that we are forcing it to not be able to act on its own. We're forcing it to be in an area. We're harming it. And when you remove all that, when something's dead and there's essentially no animal there anymore. If human or non-human animals, once you're dead, there's no animal there anymore. So I just don't. Yeah. Lewis is here. Hey, how's it going, man?
Good. Can you hear me?
I can. Yeah.
All
Yes.
right. I think this is the first time I'm using Streamlabs, right? That's what this app is.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty cool because when you send a link out, the other person doesn't have to have Streamlabs or anything. Or actually, this is StreamYard. Streamlab is a different thing, but yeah.
Okay.
Um,
I didn't catch the entire discussion you had with HazVegan, so
mhm.
I'm not sure I have necessarily anything to critique of your position.
Yeah, I
You know,
was thinking there was a couple talks that we had talked about having recently. I just can't think of what those were. But with Has, the main thing we were talking about was crop deaths, and we were talking about my new definition that I put out about how it's basically everything's on a spectrum.
I did catch part of that, but since I was multitasking, I must admit that I didn't follow your entire definition all the way through. Because
Mhm.
my brain was divided between these multitasking stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, my definition is something like this. Well, not something like this. This is what the wording is. Veganism is a philosophy that seeks to extend moral consideration to non-human animals based on sentience. And then I have this whole section about how the goal of the movement would be, if possible, to not violate negative rights to animals by intentional use of force. But then I go through and point out that the actions of a vegan are on a spectrum. So calling somebody vegan or not doesn't seem reasonable to me based on how it's on a spectrum.
I think that's generally fair, and I guess the weeds would be what's entailed in that spectrum, right? I think that's where the weeds that's where you know because I think we would disagree on, let's say, for example, Alex O'Connor being
Mm-hmm.
vegan. You perceive him, or you would call him a vegan. I, I wouldn't, and so I guess it would, it would be that spectrum that you're referring to that I think is where all the weeds are. Where we would kind of have to hash it out and figure out, well, maybe maybe we couldn't agree necessarily on where to draw certain lines or whatever.
Hmm. Okay, well, what about this? I think you were here when I mentioned this part, but let's say somebody considered themselves vegan. They didn't eat meat, dairy, eggs, honey, and it was that situation that I told Haz about. So they're completely full. They don't need any extra food, but they live in a society. They have grocery stores, but they go out into nature. They go on a hike, and they see this tree that's growing this fruit, like an apple type thing. But let's say it's not even nutritious for humans, and but a human can consume it if they want because maybe it tastes pleasure. And a deer is walking up to eat that apple, and then that human shoots the deer, kills the deer, and goes and eats the apple. Would you consider that human to be vegan?
No, I wouldn't.
Okay. And so which element, what did they do that makes them not vegan to you?
I would say the harming of the deer without what I would say is a justification.
Okay. And so then this comes down to the idea of what we were talking about, where you put out this rodenticide, and so these rodents that would come to eat some produce, that because you want the produce for yourself, the rodents eat the rodenticide and it kills them, and then we can be referring to produce that is going to make say like unhealthy food, like it's just gonna the food, like if somebody goes out and eats like vegan donuts or vegan cake or something like that and they're overweight, so they're not doing it for their health, they're essentially paying to have animals executed, sentient animals executed, so they can consume this product.
I would say that the intent is very different from the deer hypothetical that you gave,
Okay.
because in terms of intending to kill the deer,
Hmm.
you're the intent is to kill. And I think veganism being a philosophy, it is about intent. It's not necessarily about consequences, because if it were about consequences, then nobody would be vegan, because every human does something that is harming sentient individuals. And I would argue that I think that many, if not most, or maybe even all insects are much more likely sentient than not,
Hmm.
based on what I have seen. And so
Yeah.
I don't think you can go through life without, if you're looking at just consequences, I don't think you can
Hmm.
go throughout life without harming some kind of sentient individual. And so that's why I
Yeah.
say that it shouldn't be about consequences, that veganism should be about intent. And yeah, that's kind of where.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and well, I know what you mean, but I feel like the intent's the same. So I agree. Harm is going to happen. I don't think people should stop eating food because crop deaths. I do think maybe people should stop eating unhealthy food and getting overweight because crop deaths. But mostly, I'm just trying to point out that veganism, I feel, must be on a spectrum. So if somebody puts out the rodenticides to get the rats to eat them, that is intentional. How is that not intentional?
It's intentional for the, let's say, the person who's putting out the rodenticide, right?
Yeah.
But to consume plant foods, right? It's not entailed to kill animals, right?
Um, if you are aware that the plant food did kill animals, then yes, and if not, then no.
I would disagree. I think that you can. Uh, I don't think that, like, so. For example, if I knew that my taxes, right,
Hmm.
that I pay to my government was being used to bomb innocent Palestinians or whatever, was, giving weapons to other countries, to do some horrible things that I completely disagree with. I'm not intending for that to happen, even though I'm willingly giving my taxes to my government, right? So I think
Hmm.
it's different. I don't think I'm intending to have my government do that, in spite of the fact that my government is doing that, right? And I think in a non-vegan world, I think it's similar to that
Yeah.
vegan world, right? There's probably no way to grow any kind of plant-based foods without. I mean, unless you're doing on the most local level where you're doing it yourself and you're being super, super, super careful, where you have some sort of a vertical farming. Because if you're stepping into your own little garden,
Hmm.
uh, you're not going to make sure that you're not stepping on insects that are crippling them or killing them while you're going to pick your homegrown tomatoes, right? So uh,
Hmm.
I think that in you're not intending, even though you know that there's almost no way that you're going to step into your garden probably without harming some insects,
Yeah. Oh no, I agree. There's almost no way that these accidents might not happen. But right now, I'm kind of focusing on the intentional ones. So similar to knowing that a deer is going to come eat this apple in the forest that you want, that we're calling not a vegan thing to kill this deer for so you can eat your apple. If you know there are rats, whether they're in the forest or in your farm or whatever, you know rats are going to come to consume what you want to consume. You'd put this poison out so they can get it. Now, if the deer you shoot in the forest eat the apple, if that apple's your only food and that's how you stay alive, then I would say that at some point it becomes reasonable and acceptable. But
yeah,
but yeah.
and I'm not saying that, I wonder if you're assuming that if I have a position that differs from yours on this, that I'm saying that vegans should not care about crop deaths. That's not me, and from what I understand, that's not HazVegan's position either. I think I do very much care about crop deaths, but I just don't think it's. I don't think there's. I'm not intending to harm insects by eating foods that may have been grown by non-vegan farmers who are using tractors or things like that.
It doesn't matter if they're vegan farmers. If you're paying them to do a thing. Now, if it's your only option, that's fine. But what if you go to a store and you want to get apples or broccoli, and there's a box that has apples and it says no crop deaths happen to get these apples, and then another box says X amount of crop deaths happen to get these apples, and they're the same price. Does it become a vegan obligation to buy the one that doesn't cause the deaths?
I would think so. I would probably lean towards yes, and I certainly, in the very least, it would be morally virtuous. But I would probably say that it probably would be an obligation.
Okay. Well, and then my last question would be, is it practicable to not be overweight? And by practicable, I mean possible with the extension of can be successfully done.
I think for many or most people, sure.
Yeah. So that's kind of something worth thinking about. Now again, there's a huge problem in this world where this unneeded suffering is happening, and there's 1,000 focuses that are much more needed than worrying about insect death or worrying about overweight people. But just as far as us vegans that find it interesting to break these things down and to do the best we can, I would say, I mean, I just want to be healthy for the sake of being healthy. So that's why I'm going to continue to be healthy. But an added element is if I think humans can practicably be not overweight, that it's food addictions that are getting in our way, but food addictions aren't an excuse to not eat meat. So they're not an excuse to be overweight. Or I'd even say not just to not be overweight, but to consume things that we know are unhealthy. In the same sense that we know we have enough studies that non-vegans should switch over and be vegan, we have enough studies to know that every diet, doesn't matter if it's carnivore, keto, paleo, Mediterranean, whole food, all of those, every single one of those has one thing in common, and it's processed sugar, garbage, ice cream, cake, donuts, not healthy for you at all for the human body or any animal's body. So to consume these things, unless somebody figured out a good way to create these without crop deaths, that if rodents and insects and the birds that eat the insects and various different animals are being killed to get a vegan donut, I'm not saying if you're hearing this and you're vegan that you need to feel like you're not vegan if you eat a vegan donut. It's just worth thinking about.
I would definitely agree with that. I think it is worth thinking about, but I think at the same time, and I'm assuming you've probably thought of this because it's the first thing that comes to my mind with this line of argument that you're putting forward,
Mm-hmm.
is that it's not just eating healthy or eating not in excess, but it's a million other things that you would have to do using this line of argument, right? You would have to not use a vehicle to get around. You would have to not pay for deliveries because those deliveries are using vehicles, and those
Mm-hmm.
vehicles are invariably going to kill who knows how many insects and perhaps or potentially other animals or even humans, right? And so if you
Yeah.
go down that road of saying that we ought to or that we have to be vegan, we
Mm-hmm.
have to eat only the amount of calories that sustains us in a healthy way, then using that argument, like I said, I think you'd have to say that there's many other things
Mm-hmm.
that you would also have to do that may not have anything to do with eating, but just doing things that end up uh, needlessly harming or potentially harming animals or even humans. So
Yeah, no, definitely, and I agree, and that's why I don't think anybody needs to do anything specific to be vegan. In my mind, if you are a person that extends moral consideration to animals, and hopefully, therefore, are willing to have conversations with other people to figure out the best approaches to do, that's what veganism is, and then past that, everybody would have their limits. I was talking, Haz was who I was just talking to, and because of him learning about monkeys being trained to get coconuts, he cuts down on his coconut consumption. So we can all do different things. Rich, vegan pundit, went 10 years without driving because of insects getting hit by cars. Now, I personally would eat whatever healthy food I need to be healthy, even if it causes insect death. But I might say I'm not going to eat vegan ice cream because of it. But I might be willing to say I don't care enough about insects that I'm willing to drive, even if it's going to kill insects. And I don't think it's beneficial to tell each other who is or who is not vegan. We could just try to convince each other to maybe do the things that cause the least amount of harm.
that sounds fair, but going back to to the whole Alex O'Connor thing,
Yeah.
from what I had read and seen from his response or responses, it seems like he was more or less making an excuse of convenience. And so that's why I have a very hard time um, saying that Alex is vegan, because it seems like that type of excuse just doesn't align with what I would call practicable and possible, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
as others have pointed out, throughout other vegan activists have pointed out, it seems that Alex probably could have, with maybe not a tremendous amount of effort, probably have been able to find plant-based foods that he'd be able to eat and sustain himself in a healthy way. It seems like it was more convenience for him, and I don't know,
Yeah.
that doesn't sit well for me in terms of you know seeing him as a vegan.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean, and it's tough, especially if you're doing something, if you're going out of your way to help animals, and then other people are doing like a more of a half-ass job of that, then I could see it feeling irritating. But it's just one of those things where, like, for somebody that decides they're gonna look into every farm possible and only purchase from veganic farms and cause no crop deaths and not eat coconuts or whatever, they might look at me or you and go like, oh, that person's not trying enough. And I agree with you. There's a bigger difference between maybe us and Alex and us and this other person. Like if Alex is eating pig meat and I think there's no reason whatsoever to eat pigs, I might say that this is not good. But in my mind, since veganism has so much to do with us humans, like philosophies and movements exist because an action is happening amongst us humans. Humans enslave, torture, and kill animals. So having this philosophy that focuses on getting away from that, I, as of right now, and I could probably be convinced otherwise, I just see the focus being on anybody that truly wants to do that. Like Alex is going out of his way to have talks with Peter Singer and Destiny and different people, even after coming out as not vegan. He has a strong focus on caring about the ethical side of animals. And I just don't like the idea of deciding this person is or is not a vegan. The amount of people since I started this channel 3 months ago that tell me I am not a vegan because of my thoughts on roadkill, therefore you're not a vegan either, Lewis. I just, changing the definition won't get people to not say dumb stuff like that somebody's not a vegan. But yeah, I don't know. This is where I'm at right now.
Yeah, that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
And as an aside, I think that I think we definitely agree on the roadkill issue. Hold on one second. Let me just hang that other line up. Yeah, I think as you probably know, I agree with you on the roadkill. If you're not, let's say the hypothetical is that you're not in any way, shape, or form, like promoting the idea that people should be eating animal flesh, then I don't see eating roadkill necessarily as an ethical issue.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, and that's that's why I guess I think the definition might need to be a little looser. But then again, I don't know if it even fits, if the roadkill thing fits into the definition. I think some people just view it as if it belonged to an animal, you just leave it alone. So if it's honey that was completely abandoned and will never be come back for, they'll say leave it alone. If there's feathers that fall out of a bird and land on the ground, leave it alone. And the roadkill thing. I guess in a sense it doesn't matter because the roadkill thing usually is just a philosophical talking point to point out that for most of us vegans anyways, I think we care about harm coming to animals, harm and death. And so if something's already dead, it, like, in a sense doesn't matter. Like I wouldn't want somebody like a person that's interested in fornicating with a dead body to have their way with, if a family member of mine dies. Like I would feel like this like weird disrespect thing happened, but it's just because of emotional connections thing. It's like, no, once something's dead, it's dead. Eventually it's going to decompose. It's going to become dirt. It's so on and so forth. So who cares? And it's just a separate point in the same sense that I don't think veganism is about what happens to humans. I believe veganism is about non-human animals. I think veganism is also about living animals. When we add in the sentience means it is alive. That's part of it.
Yeah, I think I agree with pretty much all of that. I would also add that veganism is also specifically about human behavior. It's not about animal behavior, right? So it's about what human actions are in relationship to non-human animals, right? I mean, I think that's the original intent of the definition of veganism, right? Under cross, it's what human behavior is, and also I think it was really regarding living animals, right? Because because I think that's what the intent was about. It's about not exploiting or harming living animals. I don't think, from my reading of the literature from back then, that there would have been an opposition from Cross to eating, let's say, roadkill. And I kind of hate that term anyway, but eating
Yeah.
roadkill, if under the caveat that it wouldn't be promoting the eating of animals. You know what I'm saying? So I think that
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, and yeah, I mostly agree with you. Um, I like the idea of it being extending moral consideration, which could potentially include um, intervening of some kind with actions from an animal to another animal. But for the most part, I agree. I like for example, if you had, like, let's say you had a pet bunny or something, and then you also had a pet dog, and I mean, this is a bad example because it probably only works with pets, which we shouldn't have anyways. But like if your pet dog started attacking your bunny,
Mhm.
you would probably stop it. I don't know if you'd factor that in as a vegan thing to do.
I wouldn't.
Um,
I wouldn't.
okay.
No.
But yeah, I think when people talk about predator culling, it's just an interesting philosophical side topic that's not really a vegan topic. So I think I agree with you that veganism should be about the actions of humans to non-human animals.
Yeah. Now, of course, for me, like I would consider myself a very morally virtuous person, because, like you, and I've heard you talk about this, I have regularly, if the situation presents itself, I've regularly gone out of my way to take worms or snails that I've
Mm.
seen on the sidewalk or someplace where it's not hospitable for them, and put them in a place which would seem more hospitable, like in moist grass or something like that. So I've done stuff like that. So I would consider myself very morally virtuous, and I
Hmm.
think a number of these issues really are boiled down to what could be seen as morally virtuous versus what can be seen as moral obligations. And I think that could be a very interesting discussion for us, or for any vegans. Now it may be kind of an in-depth discussion, so I don't think we have. I don't have time for it now, and you probably don't either. But
Right.
I think that is something that maybe you know can be discussed at some point between us. Like,
Hmm.
what do we consider what would be moral obligations versus what we would consider as morally virtuous things to do.
Yeah, yeah. No, that would be interesting, and there's so many factors that would come into it. That'd be a fun conversation for sure.
Mhm.
I think that, which is why I think kind of, I don't know if baseline's the right word for it, but like the baseline would be to not violate the negative rights, and then anything beyond that becomes complicated, especially since I think the only true moral obligation past that would involve neglect, which I think only really factors into human on human.
Mm.
So if we do not, like, if you do something that I think is wrong, which is take in an animal and have it in your house, then if you neglect to feed it,
Mm.
then there would be a problem there. But the initial problem was the fact that you even enslaved that animal in the first place. So,
Enslaved.
yeah.
Or, I mean, another way to put it is you rescued it, right? I mean, it's like,
Yeah, I mean that's the nicer sounding word for it.
yeah.
No,
Not.
I know plenty of good people that rescue animals. In fact, I have 3 rescue guinea pigs in my house right now.
Mhm.
Um, um, but
Giving
yeah.
those guinea pigs, you're
Yeah, I
terrible.
think I think it's important I think a lot of people actually probably try to justify their actions. I'm so far past that now in my life. Like I'm personally overweight, but I think it's important to not be overweight. And
Mhm.
I personally have some rescue animals.
Mm.
Although ideally I think guinea pigs should go extinct, and
Mhm.
for the most part I don't think humans should have pets.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I might have everybody has things in their lives that
Yep.
might not be ideal, but we got to do what we can.
Yeah, and I think I agree with most of what we're talking about now.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you're still, because at one point I think you're sorry about that. I don't know if you're hearing that.
Oh, it's all right.
Different calls coming in. Anyway, I'm not sure if you still kind of hold the position that veganism is about suffering of animals. Is
Mm.
that still kind of because I
Yeah, and this will be a good point to wrap it up too, because I got to hop out of here in a second. But yeah, no, I've never viewed it as that being the only thing that matters, but I do think that is the main thing. When you look at, okay, so I think sentience is what matters,
Mhm.
and when you looking at sentience, if we imagine what part of sentience do we care about? I don't know if you saw the talk I had with Michael about breaking down. Like we were trying to figure out if there were ways to rank levels of sentience, like why we might care about a cow more than an ant or something. Um, I don't think intelligence really matters too much. And so I think it comes down to something's ability to suffer, ability to feel pain. Um, I'd say physical suffering. If you can hurt a dog's feelings the way you can hurt a human's feelings, I guess I care a little less. Although that seems kind of sad. But yeah, so physical suffering, like really all you have left, you would have something like ability to suffer, and then you would have ability to have conscious thought, and therefore you don't want to remove it of that conscious thought, which the only way to really do that would be taking it out of existing.
Mhm.
And then the other element there would be if that thing has interest in existing, then you're not only removing it from its conscious thought, but you're removing it from existing when maybe it wanted to exist. So I think all those things are worth factoring in.
Mhm.
We don't know to what extent those things happen scientifically. I believe it's pretty well known which most animals feel pain. And so I think the pain and suffering is just a huge element of it. But I don't think for no good reason any animal should just be pulled out of existence.
Mhm.
But I think we have less information on if an animal could even think to exist. But yeah, so what about you? Like, do you, aside from suffering slash harm, and then having your life ended, is there any other element of sentience that you see and recognize?
Well, okay, no, I think pretty much that covers it. If you're saying that by taking somebody out of existence, so I not only value whether somebody is suffering, and somebody, I mean, animal included, of course, an individual, but I also value their ability to subjectively experience the world, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's what you're referring to by like killing, right? If you can kill somebody completely painlessly and without them having foreknowledge that you will do that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's no suffering and there's no anxiety due to them knowing that you're going to kill them. To me, that would still be wrong because you are preventing them from uh, them, being able to experience the world. So
Yeah.
it's that experience the world regardless or irrespective of them being able to feel pain or suffering, taking that from them without their consent. Now, of course, that's a whole other issue, right? If somebody wants to die, right? If they want to die, that's a different caveat. But
Yeah, for sure.
if you're taking that away from them, if they're taking away their ability to experience the world, if you're taking away that subjective experience, then I think that is wrong, irrespective of whether they can suffer or whatever. And also,
Yeah.
and in terms of like the sentience thing, right? Their capacity to experience pain, to suffer. I think we have to also, and this is probably a bigger dive into that subject, but we also have to take into consideration their ability to mitigate the suffering that they might experience, whether that suffering is physical or mental anguish or whatever you want to consider. I think, because I think that a lot of people, get into these arguments. Well, what the sentience hierarchy argument, which I think is a shit argument to begin with. But they're like, well, humans are
Well, it can't be a shit argument because by far more insects die numbers wise, which are sentient, in crop deaths than cows and pigs and all that. Like by far.
Well, it's a shit argument in the sense that some people use it. I'm not saying that it's.
Oh, I see. Okay. I thought you just meant like in general, there like any sentient being is equal to another.
No.
And I would much rather intentionally kill 100 flies than one cow.
Yeah, I'm talking more about the hypothetical where, well, if it's a human or a dog, in a burning building, which do you save? There's many people who say, oh, well, the human is more sentient. And, I think that is a shit argument if that's going to be the only argument you present, right? Because I think there's a lot of other factors that could play into that, including like, for just one thing that comes out of the top of my head is what is the consequence of saving the human versus saving the dog, right? In terms of like the consequence, meaning like the life of the human is probably going to, in most cases, because we know that probably less than 1% of the human population, probably way less than 1%, is actually vegan.
Yeah. But then you run into an issue where if you might save the dog over the non-vegan, because the non-vegan might kill animals throughout its life, then what if there's a burning building where there's only a non-vegan in there and no dog? Do you not save the non-vegan because it might kill animals?
Possibly.
Oof.
Yeah, and this is where we get into the moral obligation versus a moral something that's morally virtuous, right? And so, I don't know what I would do. Probably I would save the person, right?
Yeah.
But not because I think it's a moral obligation at all, because I don't think that helping others is a moral obligation. I would say it's morally virtuous. So I would probably help, the person. I would try to get them out, but.
Yeah, like when I was not vegan, I would want somebody to save me. But then again, like, is there any justification for all the animals I was killing when I was not vegan and very overweight and whatever? Like, the world is a tricky place, and it doesn't mean we should give up, and it doesn't mean that we should we need to figure it out as we go. But yeah, it's that might be a good point to stop this one though. I gotta hop out and do a few things, but I'm glad you came on here and talked. And let's the topic we almost got into, that was a big one. Let's get that going soon.
All right, Carson, sounds good.
All right, take care.
Take care, buddy.